A mother with an incurable disease, a monstrous father, a spoiled younger sister. This family is destined for nothing but a bad end. The reincarnated hero, Lid Bardia, decided to live honestly. He also wants to change the future. Candace stretches after a long day of working at the computer, glad to finally have a break. The girl approached the hero and asked him how he liked the game she'd recommended to him a few days earlier. It was an otome game. The hero said it was incredibly interesting. Surprisingly, the mechanics were more engaging than he thought. He especially enjoyed the free mode, where you can write the heroine's story from scratch. The girl is glad he liked it. He talks so much. Has he really been through it all? Kanda confirms this. Ichi, 33 years old, an ordinary office worker who loves games and anime. The company pays for overtime, and you can even take days off. Nothing out of the ordinary, but he was content with this life. However, the employees often go out drinking with business partners, while Hiro spends the night playing games. He didn't even notice how his body was at its limit. The last thing he remembered was the figure of his mother who had passed away several years ago. The boy opened his eyes. He doesn't understand where he is. An unknown ceiling. He seems to have lost consciousness, waiting for a traffic light. He noticed that his legs and arms were too short. He rushed to the mirror and looked at his reflection. The hero didn't understand who it was in front of him. Suddenly, a maid ran into the room. She was surprised that Mr. Lid had woken up. She decided to tell everyone about it as quickly as possible. The man says the child is fine. They were so scared when he lost consciousness in the garden. Lid didn't understand who all these people were. The man turned out to be the child's servant. His name was Garn. The hero apologized to the servants for causing them all to worry. The maids were surprised. The boy didn't understand what he had said. Garn thanked his master for his words. However, for them, that was too much praise. He told the boy to call him simply Garn. The young man thanked the servant. Suddenly, his head started to hurt. He didn't understand what was happening. Fragments of memories appeared in his head. Someone's memories are included in it. He's just ordinary Kanda. Ichi, who works at the company. He must be him. Then he realizes he's not Kanda. He's actually Lid Bardia. He is a supporting character in Lid Bardia, appearing in the otome game Tokurella, which he played, and must help the villain who is interfering with the main character. He was reincarnated into the world of an otome game, and he wasn't just reincarnated as an evil side character. Lid rang the bell to summon a maid. He needed to understand what was going on. He had to disturb the servants. The girl entered the room and asked what had happened. Lid told her there was no need to bow. He was just checking. Lid guessed he'd be 7 this year, but the girl replied that he'd only turned 6 last month. Then he asked me to tell him about this country and his family. The Magnolia Empire. This is the territory where beastmen, dark elves, and other races live. Among the nobility, there are neutrals, conservatives, and reformers, but the Bardia family is primarily neutral. Their father is Liner Bardia, their mother is Nanali, and their younger sister is Meldy. They all live together. Their father occasionally travels to the city to resolve political issues. Everything is exactly the same as in the world of Tokurel. The girl asked if everything was all right with the master. Lid confirmed this and asked her not to worry. Judging by the girl's expression, he assumed she was afraid of him. Suddenly, his head began to hurt and memories came to mind that were connected with his attitude towards the servants. In the past, he was capricious and everyone was afraid of him. But why? Lid apologized to the girl for how he had treated her before. Then he asked her name and complimented her. Danae said the boy was cute, but then apologized. The next day, Danae wakes up the young master. He jumped up and blushed. The girl asked what had happened. He replied that nothing had happened. Meanwhile, he was thinking about how he couldn't say he'd fallen in love with her outfit. Danae wanted to help him change, but he said he could do it himself. Lid sat at the large table in the dining room. He was amazed by the aristocratic life, but for some reason he was alone at such a table. He asked Gran where the others were. He replied that Mr. Liner was currently in town. Mrs. Nanali wasn't feeling well, so she was in her room. Lid decided to go check on his mother. His mother is Nanali Bardia. She didn't even have a name in the game. He wonders what kind of character she is. He approached the door that led to his mother's room. Danae suggested they come another day as the woman wasn't feeling well. But the young man disagreed. He felt like he hadn't seen his mother in a while. Lid doesn't understand why he's seemingly forbidden from entering. It's as if his body and heart are forbidding him. Danae explained that Mistress Nanali wasn't feeling well, so the boy was trying to avoid meeting her. He knocked and entered his mother's room. The woman was sitting on the bed and said she was glad Lid had come. Incomprehensible feelings washed over the hero in a wave. He didn't understand what it was. Nanali said she was fine and started coughing. Lid rushed to his mother. He helped her sit up. The woman told him she'd learned from Garn that he'd lost consciousness in the garden. She asked if he was sure he was okay. The hero replied that everything was fine and he was glad to see her. Mom apologized for making him worry. Lid shook his head and said that there was nothing to worry about since he was the Margrave and his father's son. They talked a little more and the young man left, but promised to come again. Lid went to Garn to find out what was wrong with Mrs. Nanali. The servant replied that he couldn't tell him that. Lid said he was asking seriously. He wouldn't stop asking. Garn turned to the boy and said that this must remain a secret between them. Lady Nanali was suffering from magical exhaustion. The man shouldn't have told him this. Every inhabitant of this world has at least a little bit of life energy, which is called magic power. Usually if it falls, it recovers on its own, but with magical exhaustion, natural recovery weakens sharply, and then the person passes away. This disease, without a cure, is called fatal. The hero had a hunch it would be the disease Garn had mentioned. Indeed, Tokurel had a debuff called magic exhaustion. When a character suffers from it, their mana gradually drains, and when it reaches 0, their health begins to decline. A little girl appeared in the doorway. It was Meldy's younger sister. The girl asked what her brother was doing. He replied that he needed to find something and offered to help her. Meldy asked if he would be angry. The hero denied this and invited her over. He offered to read her a picture book. The girl agreed and threw herself into his arms. The boy asked her to close the door first. Lid was reading a book about princesses to his sister. Memories began to return to the hero. When Meldy was born, Lid was overjoyed. But when his mother fell ill, he was probably trying to protect his sanity, like a normal child. So he took his emotions out on others. He cursed and fought. And Meldy got it all too. They began to avoid each other, so they stopped having breakfast together. Lid apologized to his sister. She didn't understand why and said that sleeping in the garden wasn't allowed. The boy realized what she knew and added that one shouldn't pretend not to know. She replied that she wasn't pretending. The hero said that Meldy was smart. Meldy told her brother that he could call her Mel. Mother always calls her Mel, so he can too, because he's important to her. After reading the book, the girl fell asleep on her brother's shoulder. Lid called Danae. She was touched by the sight. She picked up the girl and carried her into the room. Garn asked if the young man had really been with Mistress Meldy. The hero confirmed this and told her that he had read her books until she fell asleep. The servant thanked the boy and wished for everything to continue well between them. Lid smiled and said that it would be so because she was his sister. Garn noticed that the young man had changed greatly since he lost consciousness in the garden. The hero began to justify himself, claiming he hadn't changed much. After the servant left, the hero wiped the sweat from his brow and said he was scared. But it's surprising that the current him is compared to the past. After talking with his sister and mother, he realized what he needed to do. In Tokurel, Lid commits a crime with the antagonist. When he was found guilty, he was exiled, but he could have been sent to the front or even executed. The hero must prevent this. To avoid trial and exile, he must first befriend the characters and avoid actions that could lead to trial, death, or exile. Looking at his note, the hero reflects on the fact that he wrote it himself, but that's a nearly impossible task. The game characters live in the city and in other countries, so he has little chance of meeting them because he lives in the Margrave's territory. Besides, he's a minor character. He needs to train his strength to be able to survive alone, and for this he needs to save up money. And most importantly, to cure Mother. These were probably Lid's feelings when he saw her condition. His beloved mother was weakening, but he could do nothing. His heart was breaking and he hid his bitter feelings. The hero suggested that family relations had deteriorated due to his mother's illness. He needed to restore family unity. He needed to find a scientific way to avoid condemnation. He needed to live by the law. Kanda recalls the life, last days, and death of his mother. He doesn't want to go through that again. He collected all the literature he could find and decided to start searching for information. He would definitely save his mother. In this world, the hero is Reed Baldia, 6 years old. Now he's a handsome boy with a perfectly matched pair of silver hair and violet eyes, and he can remember the exact contents of a book he's read. He thinks he's a super brain. He found something interesting in the book. The plants and ores of this world look and are named exactly the same as in the real world. Reed now understands what he must do. Garn addresses the hero and informs him that Mr. Liner has returned. Baldia returns. This will be the first time he'll see him in person. Garn told him the hero wants to speak with him. Standing by the door, the young man hopes everything will go well. He walked into his father's office and apologized. The father said he'd heard his son faint in the garden and asked how he was feeling. The hero replied that he was already fine. Liner decided to get straight to the point and asked what he wanted to talk about. Reed sat down and said he wanted to ask his father 2 things. He asked his father for a chance to learn magic, martial arts, and get an education. Why did the hero remember Reed, who was like in the game? Because with training, he can change. That's just the kind of character he is. In free mode, which unlocks after completing the game, Reed can memorize all types of magic. This could come in handy. However, his initial stats are very weak and it takes time to level them up. It seems there are almost no people willing to help him. But he got sucked into this grind and was able to use lead. Liner replied that he'd been thinking about it for a while, but had put it off after seeing his mental state. He asked his son if he was sure about it. Reed says it wasn't easy for him to watch his mother sick, but he realized the suffering had to end. He wanted to help his mother himself. The father smiled and said they would find him a teacher. Then he asked about the second request. The young man wanted money he could spend freely. His father asked him what he needed it for. He replied that he had some interesting ideas. He wanted to make them a reality. Reed asked his father to invest in him without any paperwork. The hero considers it a gamble. He needed to prepare the paperwork, but that would take too much time. Sometimes enthusiasm is what drives a person. That's what he bet on. The father relented and said he'd give him a certain amount, but it would be too much for a child. He hoped he definitely had some kind of plan. Reed jumped up from his chair, confirmed this, and thanked his father. Carrie said that he had one more request. He suggested making a promise with Mel. He was worried they weren't spending enough time together. Liner said he'd think about it and asked if Meldy had actually given him permission to call her that. The hero confirmed it. The children are sitting at the dinner table. The father asks his daughter if he can call her Mel. The girl panics. There was silence in the room. Meldy said he couldn't. She only allowed her mother and brother. Father was upset but didn't show it. Reed told him he'd like to go and explore the grounds today. He agreed and ordered Garn to get the carriage ready. The hero will be guarded by knights. These are a girl named Diana and a boy named Lubens. Baldia area is located far from the city, which is why it's called the border. There's plenty of empty space there for industrial development. Looking at the olive tree, the young man thought that growing olives was his father's idea. Diana announced that they would arrive soon. The hero thinks that they didn't come here to have fun. There are things in this city they want to do with money. This isn't just some village, it's the largest city in the area. They came out into the square. The knights asked the young man not to stray too far from them, as the city was very crowded. Reed agreed. The next moment, they were standing near some building. Diana asked if it was really here. The guy confirmed it, and they entered Christie's Chamber of Commerce. A girl greeted them and asked if she could recommend anything. She had cat ears. Reed mentioned that he'd recently sent a letter. The girl realized he was the host's guest and went to confirm this information. An elf came out to them and apologized for keeping them waiting. She's a representative of the Christie Chamber of Commerce. Her name is Christy Saffron. Christy Saffron is the only elf on the premises. Everything is as Garn described it. The girl invited them into the reception area. The elf and the boy exchanged pleasantries. The girl asked if the hero was sure it was best to leave guards outside the doors. Reed agreed with this and added that he would like everything they would talk about to remain a secret. He suggested getting to the main point. He asked her what she knew about lotion and conditioner. A few days ago, the hero learned that aloe vera exists in this world. He asked if aloe vera lotion existed here. Denis, passing by, asked what aloe vera lotion was. Lid was surprised that they didn't use it after washing their faces. He asked if they didn't take care of their skin. The girl didn't understand what skin care meant. He thought these were obvious things. Apparently in this world it's something unknown. Denise said she hadn't even thought about it. She wondered how he knew about it. The hero replied that he thought it would be nice if such a thing existed. Aloe grows in their garden. Lid said it helps heal wounds. The maid was surprised that this nasty weed could do such a thing. An olive field, aloe, vast land, skincare, luxury, a new product, selling to aristocrats, that's what it takes. And then the hero immediately began creating samples. First, he tried making a lotion, then asked if they had a conditioner, and tried making a sample from olives. He learned this from a video he watched to kill time. Christy said she was hearing about this for the first time. If such a thing existed, she would know. But for now, there was no thing, just an idea. The hero rejoiced inwardly. Everything was as he thought. Now something could come of it. Lid pulled out the jars and announced he had brought everything. The girl was surprised to see that he already had samples. She asked permission to try something. The hero gave the go-ahead. She removed her glove and applied the product to her hand. The next moment, she became inspired and said that things had gotten much better. She explained that she'd long suffered from dry skin and thought such a product was only a pipe dream. She told Mr. Lid that it would sell well. He was delighted that she liked it. Chris was inspired and said they absolutely had to turn it into a product. The hero told her to definitely try the conditioner. After their conversation, they began to think about their next steps. The hero was thinking about creating personal assets. To do this, he needs to find lute grass and moon grass to create a cure for magical exhaustion syndrome. While the young man was explaining something, Christina thought he was being scary. When she received the letter, she couldn't believe a child would start a conversation about trade. She left the Saffron family's Chamber of Commerce and opened her own. She hadn't expected to have to listen to the ravings of the Margrave's son. Emma noticed that her boss was in a good mood. She replied that they would soon have a lot of work. Lubens asked if everything had worked out for the gentleman. Lid replied that Christie was happy to hear him out. They were now on friendly terms with the Chamber of Commerce. There was no time to relax. If he sat idle, a terrible future awaited him. There was no time for doubt. He needed to earn money and start a new life. Suddenly, he noticed someone. It was a girl looking around. The young man assumed she was lost. He approached her and asked if she was okay. The girl shuddered. The young man introduced himself and said he thought she needed help. The girl said she was lost and couldn't find her guide. Lid asked where they had parted ways and said he would help her. After some time, a guide was found. The girl thanked the hero for saving her mistress. The hero told her there was no need to bow. It was obvious that the girls needed help. The stranger blushed. Diana and Lubens were surprised. The conductor tells the princess that she is glad that she is okay. However, the girl remained silent. She kept thinking about that boy. She said she should have found out his name. The conductor suggested that the girl had fallen in love. Meanwhile, Lubens asks if Mr. Lid is sure that he shouldn't have found out the girl's name. However, the hero didn't answer. He slept on Diana's shoulder. They smiled at the situation and decided to return to the mansion. The hero was informed that a teacher, Mrs. Sandra, had come to see him. The girl introduced herself and said that she would teach him magic. Sandra Honest, Lita's magic teacher. They exchanged greetings. The hero was waiting for this. Apparently, Lid could use all kinds of magic. The girl asked him if he'd ever used magic. The young man replied that he'd never used it. He'd only read about it in books. The teacher explains that to use magic, they need to convert their life force into magical force. Only then will they be able to use magic. So first, they need to learn how to convert life force into magical force. It's not that simple, but she'll tell him how. The young man can rely on her. From her behavior, Lid realized that she loved magic. Sandra said it would be easier to demonstrate the use of magic in person. She suggested going to the training building. The girl stood in the center of the room and told the young man to look. She summoned the magic ball, Fireball. Then she turned to the hero to ask his opinion. The young gentleman's eyes were shining. He was delighted. He ran to the girl and told her that she had cool magic. She was very touched by Elida's behavior, but she immediately pulled herself together, remembering that she was a teacher. She told him that if you memorize the image of magic well in your head, you can use it without a spell. And she demonstrated it. But they won't learn this right away. First, they need to learn to use magic power. The young man began to act, but he failed. Lid doesn't understand why. He assumes he lacks talent. Sandra understands that he's failing. She mentioned a tip for transferring magic power and suggested the hero try it. He agreed and approached her. The girl asked him to give her his hand. She began to channel magical power into the hero's body. He screamed as if he was about to be torn apart. Sandra replied that it was nothing to worry about. No one had ever been torn apart before. The young man feels as if something is tearing his insides out through his hands. It's a very strange feeling. The hero feels uncomfortable, but the girl asks him to be patient for a bit. Lid thinks she's doing this on purpose and is just kidding. The next moment, Sandra released the boy and said she was done. Lid thought it was just torture. The teacher apologized to the boy and explained that she had just performed a forced transfer of magic power on him. It takes a lot of practice to learn to control magic power independently. But if another person forces him to feel the translation, then it will take much less time. But it will hurt a little. The young man looked at the girl and thought that she should have been told this in advance. Sandra smiled and said that talking in advance was not at all interesting. She suggested trying to translate the magical power again. The hero now sensed something within him. He had already sensed the source of the magical power. Now this source needed to be translated into magic. He needs to imagine the compression, and then he will feel something extraordinary. Suddenly, the boy's body began to glow. Sandra smiled and said that this was magical power. She told him to transfer the magical power into his fists. She asks him to remember the fireball she showed him. He must form an image of the magic in his mind to use it. Once he has one, he must pronounce the name of the magic, direct it at the target, and use it. Lid concentrated. He needed to gather his magical power into his fists, as teacher Sandra had shown him. Form a ball and aim it at the target. The hero activated fireball magic, and it worked. The teacher was surprised. Lid was delighted and ran to the girl. She remained silent. Then she said that she didn't think that he would be able to advance so much in using magic in one day. Even if a person has learned to translate magical power, they won't be able to immediately become familiar with magic. It takes a great deal of effort to memorize the image. Sandra smiled and said that Mr. Lita had a great imagination. Perhaps he was a genius. The hero managed to create several more fireballs, and all of them hit the target. He tried using them without the spell, and they worked successfully. Sandra continued to call Lid a genius, but the young man was feeling unwell. His magic power had diminished. They'll give a lecture next. Lid must have overdone it. Everyone is born with a certain amount of magical power, but it's the same for everyone. The more often you use magic, the greater its capacity becomes. The young man asked if there was a way to restore lost magical power. Currently, there's only one. Many countries are trying to create a restoration potion, but so far no one has succeeded. Lid realizes that these aren't the recovery potions that were in the game. Teacher Sandra explained about magical elements and special magic. To use magic like fireball, magical power must be converted into fire and water. This magic serves the same auxiliary role as forced transfer of magical power. She said that magic isn't that simple. You can even create your own magic. The young man was surprised. Sandra said the hero was just beginning to learn. He needed to get used to the power of magic. Lid thinks that he has become stronger. Lubens noticed the gentleman's strange movements and asked what they were. The young man replied that it was just a warm-up. Didn't the knight exercise? The knight replied that he ran, but didn't make such strange movements. The young man understands that in this world there is no concept of warm-up. He seemed confused. Knight Lubens had taught him martial arts today. He hadn't exercised much in his past life, so he didn't have much confidence in himself. Physical activity must be avoided, because the future must be changed. First, the hero takes a stance and then swings. He's quite good at it, and Lubin suggests he practice. The knight told the young man to hit where he wanted. Lid rushed into the attack. They're sparring. The boy doesn't understand what's happening to him. His body felt light. It was so much fun swinging a wooden sword. It's all thanks to Lid's high physical abilities. It's as if he's capable of anything. Leuven said that was all for today. He added that he could even become better than Mr. Liner. Lid enjoys being praised, but he's never won. Is there anything he can do to make that happen? He asks the knight how long he and Diana have been friends. The knight replies that they live near each other and have been friends since childhood. The hero assumed he liked her. Lubens blushed and began to justify himself. The boy's face flushed. They say that maids and knights can't rise in rank because Lubens is a coward and can't confess his feelings. The knight sank to the floor and pulled his knees close to him. Lid thought he'd gone too far. Then he noticed Diana and called her over. The girl asked what had happened. Lubens was sitting on the ground, dejected. She mentioned that the knight was a bit odd and sometimes got upset over simple things. She asked what the master had told him. The hero looked away and remarked on what he'd told Lubens about being afraid of her. The young man assumed it had affected her too. He felt a strange sense of unease. Diana got angry and said that she would find out all the details from him. The girl hit her friend on the head. Lubens asked her what she was doing there. She asked if they'd finished training. The knight confirmed it. The girl said she had something to talk to Mr. Lid about. He didn't mind. Diana shot up Lid's list of people he shouldn't anger. He also realized that he shouldn't joke about other people's feelings. Lid is reading a story to Meldy. They are sitting in their mother's room. She is watching them. Mel said that her brother is a great reader. He reads lines, and it's so interesting to listen to him. Lid thinks this is the right use of tone. He's pleased that Mel is happy, but lately, if he doesn't change his voice when reading, she gets angry at him. Nanali hadn't realized her son had such a wonderful skill. He's a real actor. Mel said she taught him and asked her mother to praise her too. The woman stroked her daughter's head. Today my mother is feeling better, but her complexion isn't quite right. The magical exhaustion syndrome my mother suffers from has no natural cure. Not all members of the Baldia family know this. Lid said that was all for today. Mel asked why. He replied that they had a guest and said goodbye to his mother and sister. The guest turned out to be Christy. She said that the product launch was close. After Khan donated the lotion and conditioner, he and Chris held several more meetings. He couldn't handle production alone, but with Chris's help, it became possible. Lid said he was surprised by Chris's abilities. She replied that it was all thanks to his assets. All that remains is to increase production volumes. We also need to teach people how to use products and how to take care of their health. The girl didn't understand what it meant to take care of her health. Lid thought about telling them about different skin types, sensitive skin, oily skin, dry skin, and so on. Chris was surprised he even knew about that. Measures against counterfeit products are also important. We need to prevent the creation of products that pretend to be counterfeit. These can be harmful to health. Customer service can be used as a countermeasure. You can explain how to use the product when purchasing, and if the product isn't suitable, provide the opportunity to return it. The second option is a brand logo. The Baldia family crest can be used for this purpose. Third, we're working with other stores. We plan to distribute the product not only through the Christie's Chamber of Commerce, but also through the Saffron Chamber of Commerce. And Christie was also supposed to be the face of advertising. The girl was surprised to learn this. The hero said that she was perfect for the role. He asks Chris to complete the most important task, presenting him to the Magnolia Empire. A few days later, Liner suggests that if the goods are so good, they could be presented to their majesties. When he goes to the capital, Lid plans to ask the chamber representative, Christie, to accompany his father. His father was surprised that it wasn't him. The young man explained that he wasn't old enough to explain which part of a woman's body is associated with her beauty. He wouldn't sound convincing. He thought she would be perfect because she had an elegance unique to her. The lead suggests that there will be men who will see Chris's beauty and want to give her as a gift to their wives and daughters. The boy's father was shocked. Was a 6-year-old really talking? He confirmed that this would be the case and then agreed to go to the city with a Chamber of Commerce representative. Chris said she wasn't particularly confident, but she would try her best. Suddenly, she remembered something. She pulled out the moon herb. It was one of the healing herbs the young man had asked her to find. By using it, Mother's illness can be slowed down. He began to cry. Lid thanked Chris, who, in turn, told him not to lose heart. The only thing left is the loot grass. But he can't find it yet. He needs to wait. A few days later, Father went to the city with Chris to give a gift to their majesties. Bardia grows the product for lotions and conditioners, and the Chamber of Commerce handles processing, production, and packaging. The hero has retired from developing skincare products. His next product will be a restoration potion made from moon grass. Even if it's impossible to completely cure the disease, it can stabilize the condition until a miracle cure is developed. But there's one problem. The hero has no pharmaceutical knowledge. Garn suggested asking Mrs. Sandra. The teacher asked him what he wanted to know. Lid said it was about the grass. Sandra didn't understand what kind of grass it was. Lid replied that this magic herb has the property of restoring magical power. Sandra jumped up from her seat. She was surprised that moon grass existed. She apologized for saying it so loudly. She'd been to the Imperial Laboratory earlier, and there they'd been studying a magic power restoration potion. Lid was surprised by the coincidence. Then Sandra told him about her business in the city. Elite mages were gathered in the city to develop a potion to restore magic power. Sandra, who had long loved magic and left her mark on the study of magic, was appointed head of the laboratory. However, for some reason the goods sent last week have not arrived yet. This has happened before. Development is running late again. There's nothing we can do. We'll have to change the cooking method. But they should have already compiled a report. She's starting to worry. Suddenly she ran into an unfamiliar woman, whom she saw for the first time in the palace. This woman said that while all sorts of mice are running around here, it's restless here. She asked the lead developer about the process. Sandra thinks some of the aristocrats don't like them. They don't like the fact that they're sending large sums of money to who knows who and for what purpose. People started leaving because they weren't seeing results. They were short-staffed. Sandra decided to take charge and then left the lab. She renounced her family, fearing that her resignation would cause a scandal. People discussed the girl and her actions. They discussed her failure to carry out a state order. They even said she deserved nothing but execution or exile. And when everyone had already begun to forget her, Margrave Liner hired her as a teacher. And that's how she ended up here. Lid thinks that she was in serious trouble and he will have to force her to do the same research again. But he wants to save his family. He asked the teacher to help him. It's a secret. But his mother suffers from magic exhaustion syndrome. There's no cure yet. So he wants to make a magic power restoration potion to prolong her life, at least a little. The hero needs Sandra's powers. He wants her help making a magic power restoration potion. The girl thought that this way she could repay the debt to the Margrave for hiring her. She said that if she was right for him, she would help. She would do everything to save Lady Nanali. Lid took her hand and thanked her. After that, he promised to prepare Sandra's lab and other things she might need. She was thrilled with the idea. When she was in the city, she found the moon grass, but she was never able to obtain it. There was no information left about the moon grass in a lab. None at all. The girl said that he could call her simply Sandra, but during class he should call her Teacher Sandra. The young man agreed and they laughed. Lida is wondering how his father is doing with Chris. Meanwhile, in the city, Chris was in the palace. The woman said the lotion and conditioner were simply amazing. She asked Chris to sell the recipe and rights to the Magnolia Empire. Chris mentally called out to Mr. Lid, Liner and Christie. During a break on the way to the capital, her father mentioned they'd be arriving soon and asked her if she was ready. She confirmed this and said that this was rare for her, but she would do everything in her power. The man said she should be on her guard. She needed to be more careful with her words and behavior. The capital was a terrifying place. Compared to it, a Margrave like him seemed like a speck of dust. Emma said that she had already seen the capital. Looking at this view, Chris said that she admires this view every time. This is a fortress city. The imperial capital of Magnolia is surrounded by 2 walls. The aristocrats live within the palace walls, which are approximately 5 meters high. Beyond the walls lies the ordinary city, protected by a wall. Emma replied that even the Elven Kingdom wasn't that big. Mr. Liner had already ridden ahead, but they'd been standing there for a long time. The guards asked them to show their offerings. The Liner placed his hand on the knight's shoulder and said he trusted these women. The guards gave them permission to pass. The warrior they just saw is a ward of Count Laurent, who has encroached on their rights. The man suggested he probably wanted to learn information about the goods. Chris asked him to be careful. Liner said it was his own fault for not explaining. He didn't know something like this could happen right during an interrogation. Suddenly, Count Laurent appeared and said he hadn't expected to see him there. They hadn't seen each other for a long time. The man then asked who the beauty behind him was. She replied that her name was Christy Saffron. He called her a hooligan who ran away from the Saffron Chamber of Commerce. There were rumors about her, though they were unconfirmed. Then he switched to Emma. He said that they really were friends with the animals. Calling beastmen animals is considered an insult. He says it deliberately to anger Chris. Christy clenched her fists. She was about to say something because she wouldn't allow Emma to be insulted. However, she didn't have time to do so as Margrave Laner intervened. He said it was too much. They had come for an audience with their majesties. Wasn't it foolish of him to insult them? He agreed, apologized, and left, saying he had business to attend to. Sitting in the reception area, the girls asked who it was. The Margrave replied that it was Laurent Galliano. He adores money. Emma approached Miss Chris and apologized for causing trouble. Christy hugged her and assured her that she was innocent. Count Laurent was blacklisted by Christie's chambers. The Liner told them not to worry. Their majesties were ordinary people with common sense. Suddenly, a maid entered the room and said she would show them the way. The hero reports that all the nobles have gathered in the audience hall. The newcomer asks if they've kept everyone waiting, showing Empress Matilda Magnolia and Emperor Erwin Magnolia. Leaner Baldia announces his arrival at the palace. He apologizes to his companion for always having to travel so far. She claims to be the daughter of Baron Martin Saffron of the Kingdom of Estolia. The girl introduces herself as Christy Saffron. Laner is surprised, having heard she was from the Chamber of Commerce, not a baron's daughter. Christy explains that her father only recently received the title. Liner says that since she's a nobleman's daughter, he treated her improperly. His interlocutor is shocked. The ladies whisper that she turned out to be more than just some girl from the Chamber of Commerce. The Empress says she wants to try the goods as soon as possible. The Emperor asks to be introduced. Christy says she brought it to them and shows them the goods. The young man notes that the men do not show interest, unlike the Empress and the maids, who are very interested. Christy smiles and says that she uses this lotion and conditioner herself. The Empress asks permission to touch her hair. Christy, of course, agrees. The Empress is surprised. She says it's the first time she's seen such smooth and shiny hair. She says only women can understand the value of such hair. Christy suggests she try the lotion. A man approaches His Majesty. He asks for forgiveness, but warns that it could be dangerous. She emphasizes that she is speaking with Christy. The Empress coldly asks Count Laurent when she last asked his opinion. Christy replies that the lotion relieves dryness. The Empress asks if Christy is planning to bribe all the ladies in the palace. The Empress is delighted and is ready to call this product the best. The Empress says the lotion is amazing. She offers to sell Christy the recipe and writes to it to the Magnolia Empire. Someone asks Mrs. Christy if she can hear. The girl says she cannot accept the offer. She explains that she cannot decide alone. The Emperor insists that Margrave Laner, as a vassal, cannot refuse them. Christy despairs over Mr. Liner, screaming that she can't do anything. Mr. Lid appears and tells her to rely on him. He says their Chamber of Commerce took a risk releasing this product. If they want to take away their rights, they'd better leave the area. Instead, he offers His Majesty the right to receive the goods first. The Empress says they will try to keep the goods in stock and asks them to forgive her. The Empress calmly replies that so be it. The courtier anxiously asks if Your Majesty is certain of this. The woman says Christy is right. If you take away the people's rights, the empire will perish. She believes rights need to be reconsidered. The Emperor agrees and promises to more strictly enforce citizens' rights. He reserves production rights for Christy. The man asks if everyone agrees. The courtiers bow and answer affirmatively. Christy is surprised. She thinks about how suddenly everything started going according to plan. An idea strikes her, and she wonders if this was all a setup. Christy reflects on the Empress's behavior. She understands that her goal wasn't production and rights, but rather the acquisition of lotion and conditioner. Christy believes the Empress couldn't simply give the order, as that would have been an abuse of authority, so she forced Christy to promise her herself. Christy feels her pride wounded, like a speck of dust compared to the Empire. She realizes she's simply been dancing to the Empress's tune. Later, Sitting in a chair, Christy admits that she is very tired. Liner serves her tea and praises her. He reminds her that he told her to be careful. A servant announces that their majesties have come to see them. Christy and her maid are shocked. The Emperor and Empress enter the room. They apologize for the sudden visit and for not greeting them properly. The Empress apologizes to Christy for having to participate in this. They explain what happened today. It turns out Margrave Liner had already delivered samples to their majesties. The product was so astonishing that rumors began to spread. Among the aristocrats, there appeared those who wanted to obtain the rights to this valuable gift from the territory of Baldia. Since the opportunity to renegotiate the aristocrats' rights has arisen, she considers the day productive. Christy replies that everything is fine. Because the production rights were given to Chris, the aristocrats won't be able to get them just like that. The Emperor says he has something to talk to Liner about. Meanwhile, the ladies decide to summarize their conversation. The Empress immediately gets down to business regarding the right to receive the goods first. Christy is surprised by such haste. The Emperor tells Liner that someone from another country has approached him about a marriage. And this has created a problem. He explains to Liner that it just so happens that there is no one more suitable for this marriage than his son. The narrator describes a strange feeling, as if something was coming out of him, as if a crack had formed at the bottom of the glass. She says the illness came on suddenly. At first she felt tired, and later she could no longer stand. The woman lay in bed, growing weak, and wondered if there was anything she could do about her body. She began to feel as if the disease had stopped progressing. She says she slept terribly. Lid started snapping at others, and Mel started crying more often. She worries about why the disease is eating away at her children's hearts. The mother notices that recently Lid has started to behave differently and speak like an adult. Mel happily reports that her brother read her a book. Mother understands that Lid has improved his behavior and she too can't give up. She is determined. She believes she can overcome this disease. Lid lies on the grass, shielding his eyes from the sun with his hand, and remarks on how nice the weather is. He thinks that since Daddy and Chris are trying so hard, he should also be useful. He decides to try attribute magic, like in the game. Lid reflects that this universe is very similar to the world of the game Tocarella, which he played in a past life. The young man obtained the necessary materials and developed personal care products, something that couldn't happen in the game. He understands that here, his life could be completely different. He has already checked the fire, so he will continue checking the other attributes. He creates a wall of ice and exclaims that he was able to do it. The lead is thinking about what to name the attributes. They need something easy to visualize, like Fire Spear or Thunder Spear. He decisively shouts out the name of the spell, Fire Spear. Lid says admiringly that it is wonderful. Mel screams in delight. Lid realizes in horror that she saw everything. Mel says she's been watching since the moment he summoned the light. Lid asks Mel to keep his magic their secret. Mel admires the beauty of magic. Lid promises to read her any book she wants. He's worried that if everyone finds out, rumors will spread. Mel asks to show him the magic again. A few days later, he received a letter from Chris asking if they had succeeded. The letter states that Count Laurent has been banned from entry. It also states that Empress Matilda is dangerous. Lid thinks this is a bit odd. He's puzzled as to why the unknown count was suddenly denied entry. The teacher announces that classes are starting soon. She explains that attribute magic requires a certain aptitude. The woman asks if special talents are needed for special magic. Lid honestly replies that he doesn't know. The teacher praises him and says he doesn't need anything. Lid, surprised, asks if that means anyone can use it. The woman explains that magic must be created by oneself or received from someone else. Lid is delighted that it can be created. Lid asks if it's the same special magic. The teacher says yes, but a more precise image and stronger magic are needed, otherwise nothing will work. The teacher adds that only the creator of this special magic can transmit it, and for this to happen, both parties need enormous magical power. Lid concludes that if there isn't enough power or image, the magic won't activate. The teacher confirms this is true. The teacher says moongrass can restore magical power. Lid wonders what will happen with it. The woman thanks Lid and, forgetting about her uniform, shouts that she's going to create samples. She announces self-study and runs off. Lid reflects that original magic requires magical power. He wonders how much of it he has. He thinks maybe there is magic or a tool that can measure its amount. The young man exclaims about how heavy the rain is and decides he needs to get back quickly. He apologizes for getting wet. The maids are worried that Mr. Lid will catch a cold and fuss around him. The hero tries to calm them down, but they are adamant. They remember how he fell in the garden and insist that he needs to be warmed up. Lid is enjoying the bath, saying how long it has been since he took a bath and how good it is. In this world, a bath is a rarity, as people usually just dry themselves off with a hot towel. He didn't expect to bathe in his own room. He wonders how much water is used for such an occasion. The hero reflects on the fact that the numerical standards in this world are the same as in his past. He is preparing to conduct an experiment. Lid says that he filled the liter vessel with water made using magic. He poured out the contents, filled it again, and did this several times. The young man decides to call it 1 liter. He says that now he can do it, and next time he will try 10 times. The lead repeats this over and over, increasing the number. He thinks this will help him concentrate on the use of magical power. He breathes a sigh of relief as he announces the final number, 985. Lid explains that since a certain amount of power is spent on 1 liter magic, then he has more than 980 magical power. The name of the new magic is Magic Power Measurement. Effect: measures the amount of magical power numerically. He decides that he needs to try measuring magical power. The hero stands in front of the vessel on the stump. He confirms that nothing happened. The young man exclaims that he heard it in his head. He tries again, saying, "Measurement of magical power." Lid heard again, "Magic power amount 60." He understood that using the dimension required 20 units of magic power. He joyfully exclaims that he succeeded. The hero thinks the measurement will come in handy when he asks his mother to drink the potion. Then he'll be able to see the result. He says he is 1 step closer to his goal today. The teacher asks him to ask again. Lid explains that he wanted to know how much magical power was being consumed and created a special spell for this purpose, Magical Power Measurement. The teacher is seriously surprised by his way of thinking. She doesn't understand how he came up with it. He explains the creation process to Sandra. Inspired by the measurement of water, he created a spell for 1 liter, and then hypothesized about the numerical values. Sandra admits that such an idea never occurred to her. Lid sheepishly says that's just how it turned out. Lid notices her strange reaction. She warns that if this magic spreads, he will be taken to the imperial capital. The hero is shocked. He didn't think it was so serious. Sandra suggests discussing it with ordinary people in mind. Lid doesn't understand because everyone has magical powers. She explains that most people don't know how to use magic and don't receive even the most basic education. Even though this is a fantasy world with magic, it doesn't seem to be used anywhere. In battles, by the army, by adventurers, or in exploration. Lid understands why he didn't see many mages in the mansion. People tend to shy away from studying things they find tedious. He feels sad that in a fantasy world there isn't magic on every corner. He thinks it's wasted. Sandra says that even she couldn't create a spell for exactly 1 liter and that it wouldn't be easy for her. She believes only a genius could do such a thing. She thinks Reed is even more talented than she thought. She wonders if he's a greater genius than she is. Lid thinks that if he is a genius, then teacher Sandra should have been invited to the capital long ago. She says that's why she was chosen for the position of director at the capital's research institute. The woman explains that she was crushed by someone else's envy, but she confirms that she was indeed invited to the capital as a genius. Lid says with a smile that he expected something like this from Sandra's teacher. She admits that she was looking forward to this day, to observe her talented student, her research subject. The woman encourages him not to let boundaries restrict him. She says that if you stand out too much, no one will push you away. Lid says he understands, but for now, he'll try not to tell anyone about it, even though she could have warned him beforehand. He suggests she thought it would be more interesting this way. She confirms that this is precisely the reason. Lid yells that she's scaring him. She laughs and says he's too easy to read. The narrator reports that they then continued working on creating a drug to restore magical power. Sandra shows them their materials, moongrass. They'll experiment with all sorts of variations, eating it raw, powdered, and boiled. He knows the moongrass is quite bitter, but he's willing. Lid decides to try it for his mother's sake. The hero declares that he will do everything. He thinks about all the options he ate. Experiment results, raw, the herb restores 20 strength. Reed comments that it's very bitter. When cooked, the results are unstable, 10 to 30 units. Reed complains that it's gotten worse, the bitterness has intensified, and he needs to eat it all. In powder form, the recovery is 50 units. Reed says it was easiest to eat mixed with water, but it still wasn't very tasty. Reed concludes that the last option is the best one. Sandra suggests it's the method of administration. She suggests rolling the powder around in his mouth, to which Reed mentally calls her the devil. The woman concludes powdered tablets would be best for Ms. Nanali. She praises Reed, who has become very ill. But now, Reed tearfully realizes that they have succeeded in creating a drug to restore magical power. Reed thinks Sandra was having fun. She pressures him, asking if it tasted good and saying she put love into it. The hero, blushing with embarrassment and anger, tells the teacher that he will not forget this. Sandra replies that he'll understand everything tomorrow. Reed has a bad feeling about this. She gives him a hint. Everything can be asked of Mrs. Meldy. Reed joyfully announces his return to Mel, who greets him joyfully as well. He calls her name in surprise, noticing something strange. Mel recoils from him, screaming that he stinks. She hides behind the maid because he smells so bad and claims that he is not her brother. Reed is shocked and doesn't understand what's happening. He realizes that no one is approaching him. The butler, holding his nose, confirms that he smells. He urges Reed to take a bath. Reed apologizes and, mentally cursing Sandra, rushes to the bathroom. Knights are shown performing exercises while counting. Reed explains that the knights were doing exercises. The captain called it amazing, though Reuben still feels nauseous from the grass. He yells at him not to shirk, even though the exercises have become more difficult. Reed thinks Rubens is a talented knight. Reed recalls that Rubens was the first to recognize the importance of exercise, but he didn't think it would go this far. Rubens sneaks up on Reed. He tells him he can't relax, otherwise he would have been dead in the fight. The man says Reed can now train in the dungeons. He announces the appearance of a dungeon, and Reed is delighted. Rubens explains that a dungeon is considered a subspecies of living creature. It's a place with monsters, materials, and leveling. He continues that the dungeon's core accumulates magical power underground, giving birth to monsters and treasures. People killed by the monsters become food for the dungeon. The hero warns that if the dungeon isn't cleared, the monsters will escape into the outside world. So the knights and adventurers take charge. He explains that to destroy them, the core must be destroyed, but then everything will collapse. So the knights simply patrol and check on them. Reed thinks it's like an anthill where the queen is the core and the monsters are the workers. The young man is interested in the Adventurers Guild. Rubens explains that they're like general laborers and that guilds can be public or private. He explains the guild system in detail. There are requests accepted by freelance adventurers. Local adventurers primarily collect items. Reed says he'd like to register too. Rubens compliments his swordsmanship and says he'll excel at conquering dungeons. The young man expresses hope that by that time Rubens will be married to Diana. Rubens sheepishly asks not to mention this. Reed doesn't understand his uncertainty, since Diana would reciprocate. Rubens explains that it's because he doesn't like getting up in the morning. He says that Diana always comes to wake him up, but says that she will not do this forever, because one day she will have a husband. When she makes him breakfast, she says it's not for him, just practice for the wedding. When her parents hint, she replies that Rubens is just a friend. He laments that he simply cannot please this girl. Reed thinks about what he heard. He comes to the conclusion that Diana is a real tsundere. Reed reminds Rubens of their childhood promise. He says Rubens must definitely go on a date with Diana. Rubens is shocked and does not understand why he suddenly decided this. Reed says a knight shouldn't hesitate. He advises Rubens to consider the true meaning of her words. Rubens thoughtfully repeats to himself, the true meaning. Reed is pleased that a good idea occurred to him. Rubens says he understands everything. Mel asks her brother what he's laughing about. He thinks about how complicated everything is and replies that it's best not to tell anyone else yet. Diana remembers how they often played here. The girl asks what he wanted. He calls her name shyly. Reed reports that he later heard that they had finally started dating. The hero looks out the window and thinks that he wanted them to get married right away. Mel joyfully wakes her brother, shouting that it's already morning. Reed sleepily wishes her good morning. Reed notes that Mel has been waking him up in the mornings lately. He used to be the first one up, and she'd resent not being able to wake him. After breakfast, she returns to her studies. She prepares for the future by studying etiquette, languages, and dance. Reed is confident that mornings are a precious time for her to spend time with her beloved brother. After all, she's only 4 years old, so she's so active. The hero thinks about Mel waking him up. At that moment, his father announces that he's back. Reed greets his father and Chris joyfully. Chris, looking very tired, quietly says his name. The young man asks Chris if she's okay. Father explains that Her Majesty enjoyed chatting with Chris. He orders her to sleep in the guest room and calls Reed into his study for a chat. The man looks very serious. Reed doesn't understand what's going on. In the office, the father sits down across from his son. He asks Reed point blank why he suddenly changed so much. The father notes that Reed remained calm under pressure and was clearly not doing childish work. He says this applies to gifts as well. He claims there are no books containing such knowledge in the mansion and demands an explanation. Reed is at a loss. He didn't think his father would put pressure on him like this. He doesn't know what to say, but he finds it hard to continue lying to his father. He decides that he will speak honestly. The young man begins his story, choosing his words carefully. He says that, in fact, that day in the garden, he lost consciousness and remembered his past life. Memories from his past life and Reed's memories merged. Thus, a new him was born. The personality from his past life became the foundation. But Reed's feelings remained. He explains that Reed felt guilty for his sister and the handmaidens. He also always respected his father and wanted to be just as strong. The hero was in despair because he could not help his mother who was dying. He states that this is why he wants to protect his family and his mother. Father calls Reed. The man apologizes. He says he was simply watching and had no idea, thinking Reed was doing it all for himself. He says he's failed as a father. Reed tearfully replies that his father did notice the changes in him. Reed asks his father if he believes his story. His father replies that yes, it explains everything. The boy adds that he created the drug using knowledge from a past life. Reed clarifies that it's a drug that restores magical power. Father is shocked by this discovery. The young man explains that he brought the materials, and Sandra made it. He also created a special spell to measure power. The father is shocked by everything, including the moonflowers and Sandra's involvement. Her father says the drug is only a temporary solution for Nonali. It will prolong her life, but it won't cure her. The man asks if Reed learned this from his past life. He asks if Reed knows anything else and promises to help. He invites Harun to join their discussion. Father says he wanted to talk about something else. Father announces that he has chosen Reed's bride. Harun asks if he needs to propose, but his father says everything is decided. The engagement will take place in a couple of months. Father admits he was surprised himself. His Majesty raised the issue quite unexpectedly. Reed protests that he is too young for marriage. His father explains that it is a political marriage with Princess Renaud to strengthen their relationship. Reed thinks about how they're still just kids. Father tells Harun to get ready to meet the princess at the mansion. Harun notes that the mansion is too small for the princess. He suggests constructing a new building, taking into account the cultural differences. The father agrees and instructs Harun to prepare the plans, promising government funding. Reed asks his father why a princess from another kingdom should marry him, since their family is of lower status. Father explains that it's simple. The kingdom of Renaud is ruled by dark elves. The man points to a map showing Renaud bordering their lands. He mentions a conflict between the human and dark elf kingdoms called the Barsta Incident. Father says that the people of Barst hunted the dark elves. This led to a deterioration in relations and a breakdown in trade ties. In exchange for the Magnolia Empire's aid and ban on workers, Renaud became their vassal state, while retaining its autonomy. Eventually, everyone was released. The father explains that marriage to the emperor's son would be risky due to a possible struggle for the throne, so they proposed a marriage with an aristocrat. Reed realizes that their remote Margraviate has become the perfect choice to exile the princess away. Father says that as the son of an imperial aristocrat, Reed has no right to refuse, even though he tried to object to His Majesty. Reed thinks about how sorry he is for the princess. Because of her vassal status, she is forced to marry the Margrave's son. His father advises him, since he thinks so, to become a husband for her who will value her more than anything in the world. He asks if Reed can make the princess, who has been betrayed by fate, happy and says that everything is in his hands. His father tells him to protect her as his own princess. Reed, with determination in his eyes, replies that he understands everything. The young man asks her name. The father replies that she is the first princess Farah Renault. Reed repeats to himself the name of his future wife, Farah Renault. Reed later recounts telling his father he wanted to take part in the design, which is why he asked permission to visit the kingdom of Renault. He explains that he can't really explain it, but it's connected to his past life and could help in treating his mother. The father agrees, but only for a couple of days. He says there's time before the marriage announcement, and he'll arrange an unofficial visit. Reed is thinking about getting married at age 6. At that moment, Harun addresses him. Aaron expresses confidence that Reed will make the princess happy. Reed thanks him and says he will try his best. After all, he's still a child, and Reed says the term young wife isn't quite right. Harun apologizes. Reed cheerfully replies that it's no big deal. Reed approaches the guest room and calls out to Chris. He assumes she might be asleep and quietly peers inside. He decides to enter the room, quietly calling Chris's name. The hero realizes she must be very tired. The young man sees Chris sleeping and thinks how beautiful she is. Chris mutters something anxiously in her sleep. It seems she's having a nightmare about the Empress. Reed feels awkward as he walks in. He tries to get out, but the door won't open. He panics, thinking that someone is standing behind the door and holding it. The young man hears Mel's voice, saying she won't let him go. Reed is shocked that it's his sister. Mel scolds him for entering without permission. Reed justifies that he just wanted to check on her and begs his sister to open the door. The girl continues to tease him. Reed, panicked, asks her to hurry before Chris wakes up. Chris wakes up and apologizes for falling asleep due to fatigue. Reed is relieved to think he wasn't caught. He apologizes for what happened in the capital. Chris, it turns out, has already told him everything about the Count, the negotiations, and how she too was kept in the dark. She also told how rudely Count Roland had treated her. The Emperor offered to punish him, but Chris, to the Count's surprise, refused. In the throne room, Chris addressed the Emperor. She said she had something she wanted to say, and he allowed her to speak. She asked all nobles not to believe rumors, but to base their opinions on evidence. Otherwise, their country would be despised in the diplomatic arena. The girl urged them to use this opportunity to reflect and correct their mistakes. The Emperor apologized to her for the lack of education of his aristocracy and expressed the hope that she would forgive them. The problem affected not only Roland, but the entire aristocracy, who were reprimanded. Reed says it turned out to be much more serious than he thought. Reed admires her and thinks what a great woman she is. Chris asks him what he said again, but Reed replies that she misheard. The young man asks if this means all that remains now is to wait and watch Roland. Chris replies that his faction has already lost its position and influence. Chris explains that Roland didn't get his title of Count by chance. Reed understands that they needed to defeat this enemy if they wanted to expand their trade. Reed says he's pleased with the successful negotiations. He's very pleased that Christie's company came to Baldia and thanks them. Chris replies that she's honored to hear that. She adds that she's also very lucky to have met him. She thinks about how she wasn't recognized, no matter how hard she tried. Her efforts bore no fruit. They say Chris was born into a trading company where her older brother was destined to be the heir. But her business acumen was far stronger. Chris thought she'd be supporting her brother from behind the scenes. That's what she did until people started talking. Given her track record, Chris was the one who should inherit the company. Fearing its collapse due to controversy, she decided to go independent. Even for the most talented person, starting from scratch in an unfamiliar land is extremely difficult. There were days when she couldn't achieve any results. But suddenly something changed. She believes that sometimes even talent doesn't yield results without luck. But she still fought and tried desperately because luck only comes to those who work hard. Reed says his butler told him about her company. He credits everything he learned about her to her own efforts. He says Chris has achieved a lot. He asks where her self-confidence is. She thinks about how hard she worked. Sometimes it was incredibly difficult. Perhaps she always longed for someone to recognize her, and she is so glad that this day has come. Chris apologizes for losing her head. Reed reassures her and asks if His Majesty will work with her now. Chris confirms and lists the terms. Prepare a month's supply. Full prepayment. And this does not apply to additional orders. She says the aloe growing is just beginning. But she has already taken measures in advance and asked her father to find fertilizer. Reed is impressed by her business acumen. She used her connections, secured a contract, and placed orders, raising the market price of aloe. The young man realizes the Empress will now have her hands full. Chris adds that he's good at advertising, having even managed to win over the Empress. Chris says there are few people in the world as handsome as him. She sheepishly adds that he should choose his words more carefully. Reed offers her a great slogan: "You can be as beautiful as Chris." Chris sheepishly agrees. The hero says that after a long discussion he managed to persuade her to name the products Christy Lotion and Christy Emma Hair Dye. Chris is surprised that paint can be made not only from olive oils but also from essential oils. Reed thinks she doesn't intend to stop at just these products. He understands they will continue to evolve. Chris says they need to remain optimistic. Reed adds that they can now deal directly with Her Majesty. Reed remembers Chris muttering in her sleep that Empress Matilda was dangerous. He notices with a smile that she even talks about Her Majesty in her sleep and advises her to stay away from the Empress. Chris is confused as to how he knows about her dream. Reed innocently replies that he heard it while she was sleeping. The girl screams that looking at the face of a sleeping girl is the height of indecency. Mel, who is eavesdropping behind the door, misunderstood everything and is ready to defend Mr. Reed's honor. Meanwhile, Nanali lies in bed. Her heartbeat is so fast even as she concentrates on the sound of dripping water. She cries, but whispers that no, she will not give up. The woman looks ahead with determination. She promises that she will definitely get back on her feet. Convincing herself that everything is fine, Nanali tries to gather her strength. There's a knock at the door. Nanali allows entry, saying it's open. Liner, Reed, and Sandra enter. Sandra greets them politely, wishing them a good day. Apologizing for her appearance, she sits in bed and introduces herself as Nanali Bardia, the Margrave's wife. Reed admires his mother's generosity. Sandra introduces herself and says she's involved in magical research. Liner, standing by the bed, says that until now he hid the name of the disease from her because he was a coward. What prevents you from living a normal life? It is a fatal and incurable disease, a disorder of depletion of magical power. Manali calmly replies that she knew. Liner, horrified, asks who told her. She asks her husband not to make such a face. She says she knew about her condition herself. She simply didn't like being just sick. Reed cries, realizing that her mother had long since accepted her illness. Reed apologizes for causing her painful memories. Nanali calls herself a useless mother. The hero declares that since his mother is useless, then his father, who called himself bad, is also useless. He says he simply repeated what he said. Liner is outraged by his son's secrecy. Nanali asks him to call Maldi simply Mel. The boy screams, asking if he thought about his mother. He asks his son how hard he thinks it was for her to go through all this alone. The man admits that he knew about the fatal disease, so he simply looked away and immersed himself in work. He laments that he left her alone. Liner admits his mistake. Nanali reassures him, saying she understood he had other concerns. The man says he loves her. Nanali replies that she loves him too. Sandra interrupts them, suggesting they get down to business. She hands Nanali the drug, explaining that it won't cure her, but it will help alleviate the symptoms. Reed warns that it doesn't taste very good and advises washing it down with water immediately. Manali turns pale. Everyone rushes towards her in panic. Reed is terrified, thinking things are bad. He screams, casting the Measure Magical Power spell. Nanali's remaining magic power is 8. Reed yells at Sandra that she only has 8 units left and asks her to give her the medicine quickly. Sandra calls her name in horror. Nanali coughs up blood. The girl tried to shout to the lady to open the door. The woman was shivering and drooling. Breathing heavily, she managed to call out to Rainer once. The boy tried to encourage his mother not to give up under any circumstances. She looked at her son with a tired look. The child was screaming in horror and calling for her. He didn't want his mother to abandon him. Suddenly, a man flew into the room and kissed the woman. The boy did not expect this at all. The young man met Nanali when he was still Arvin's assistant. At the time, he was working in the capital. He even had to disguise himself. In a conversation with Arvin, he clarified whether he really needed to go into town for a routine census. The man was also dressed in disguise. He was wearing a wig. When his friend asked, he replied that he just wanted to go for a walk. There were 2 reasons for this, one of which was the desire to buy a gift for his wife. The guy frowned at this excuse. He was outraged by his friend's actions, as it was perfectly acceptable to send a servant for such things, or to ask him to do it himself. But for Arvin, it was important to choose for himself. The friend had to give in because the man was unstoppable and it made him smile. However, he later explained that his father had been feeling unwell and was finding it quite difficult to manage government affairs. The young man asked if things were really that bad. But the matter was serious. In a couple of years, Arvin would have to inherit his father's business, and it was unlikely that he would then have the opportunity to travel to the city. That is why the young man wanted to look at the landscapes that I would later come to defend. However, he asked his friend not to worry about his problems and thanked him for going to the city with him. Standing on the bridge, the friends heard screams coming from below. Someone was asking to be let go. The guy asked his friend if he could go over and check. Arvin agreed but asked him not to overdo it. While running away, the young man asked Dinas to stay with his master. A crowd of men surrounded the young woman. One of them did not expect to see her in such a place. He held her hand, intending to continue the conversation. The girl replied that the man had already been officially rejected, so they had nothing to discuss. Besides, she didn't want to talk to someone with such a huge and inflated ego. But he wasn't about to give in. Unkind grins appeared on his face and that of his friends. The girl was beginning to get seriously scared. He liked the expression on her face. The guy clarified that the carriage would arrive soon, and for every moment when she made him feel uncomfortable, the woman now had to pay. The man was pressing painfully on her chin, squeezing it, so she tried to call for help. Suddenly, a voice came from behind the crowd, a young man asking them what they were doing. The stranger covered the lady's mouth with his hand, and his companion clarified that they were lovers and had been meeting secretly. But the man who came to the rescue proved wiser and decided to ask the lady herself. She just needed to hint if these guys were bothering her. The girl bit the hand holding her and screamed that none of them were her mate and asked for help. The guy didn't need more, he already understood everything. The young man dealt with a crowd of hooligans quite quickly. He had no desire to even start talking to them, so he asked them to go away. While fleeing, Logos, from the family of Count Galliano, promised to remember them. Then the guy turned his gaze to the woman and asked if she was injured, but she began to stutter. The lady thanked him for saving her because she was screaming, but no one was in a hurry to come up. Unable to bear it any longer, the girl burst into tears from the stress and fear she had to endure. The young man patted her on the back, praising her for holding up well. Arvin and Dinas were approaching them. They were worried if he was okay. The guy scolded the bodyguard for shouting his name too loudly, considering they were there secretly. The lady admired her savior. He seemed like a handsome man to her. A couple of months later, Rainer suddenly received a notification that he had been proposed to. The friend added that his parents were not against the marriage either, but the guy refused to believe it because it couldn't be, and anyway, it was the first time he had heard about it. Arvin held in his hand a written approval from his family. Having read the contents of the letter, the boy scratched the back of his head. He had no doubt that it was written in his father's handwriting. His bride turned out to be the Crimson Lady Nanali Runamis. Previously, the girl had rejected all suitors. Some even said she was insanely beautiful. Rainer wasn't particularly convinced as he had never seen her. Later, the young man arrived at the estate, where he was very surprised to learn that the girl he had recently helped had become his bride. The lady was glad the man remembered her, as she'd thought they'd never meet again. Rainer suddenly noticed that the girl was indeed beautiful, something he'd overlooked the last time they'd met. Now it became clear to him why she was nicknamed the Crimson Lady. Nonnally asked him, confused, what he meant by that. Rainer explained in more detail. She had very beautiful red hair, and overall, she was a lovely lady. This confused the girl. The girl suddenly apologized and said that she got this nickname when she was proposed to, and she very sharply refused and that the man then could not recover. After that incident, Nonnally was considered a difficult girl, said to be so unapproachable that no one stood a chance. As she recounted this, the lady blushed deeply. The young man listened and understood, but he had originally intended the nickname to have a different meaning. Suddenly, a smile lit up the girl's face. She really liked the wonderful meaning the young man had imbued into this nickname. Now she even began to like it. Rainer confessed to Nanali that he really liked her. Not wanting to drag things out, he clarified that he wanted her to become his wife and move to Baldia with him. The lady believed that if he was not against her, then it would only be a joy to her. Nanali drank the drug. The girl asked Mr. Reed how much magical power there was. The boy quickly responded and began to use the magic power measurement, mentally pleading for everything to be all right. But suddenly Rainer himself answered for him. His wife had 101 units of magical power left. The child was delighted and told Sandra that they had succeeded. He turned to his mother and the girl began calling for her mistress. Nanali opened her eyes and looked at her son. She smiled at him with her same radiant smile and tried to reassure the boy that she was fine. The child couldn't bear it any longer and burst into loud cries. After this, Nanali was examined by a doctor who reassured the family that another attack was unlikely. They then discussed the situation together and decided to prescribe medication 3 times a day. But, just in case, they also stationed maids nearby to keep an eye on their mistress. Reed was very impressed with the drug, as it restored his magical power by a whole 100 units in 1 dose. However, Sonda believed that this happened thanks to Rainer. Then Nanali couldn't open her mouth to drink the medicine, so the man had to act quickly. He took water and the medicine into his mouth, and then, with a kiss, passed it on to the lady. The boy was delighted with how quickly his father had gotten his bearings. He genuinely thought he was a wonderful person. He then asked the girl if she had any free time, but she was surprised that Reed didn't want to spend it with his family. The child turned around and looked at his parents, who looked happy next to each other, and decided to give them some time alone. Norris approached His Majesty, asking if he'd read the letter. He felt their country was completely disrespected. Marriages should have been with the royal family or at least with equal aristocracy. Apparently, the empire held them in low regard, as they ignored the demands and decided everything unilaterally. Thus, the marriage had to be with the son of the Margrave. Moreover, they were the same age. The king replied to the man that everything had been decided. They could not influence this marriage union, since they could not allow themselves to say that they did not like their future husband. However, everything could become much easier if some problems arose from the empire's side. At these words, an ominous smile appeared on the elf's face. The aristocrat assumed they needed to test whether the Margrave's son possessed worthy talent. Norris volunteered to resolve the matter, and His Majesty clarified what exactly he had in mind. The man told his plan, and then asked with a mysterious face what the king thought about it. Sandra was pleased that the boy understood his parents' wishes. Then she told him that, looking at him, she felt as if an adult was hiding inside the child's body. This made Reed laugh, as she knew that couldn't be true. Then he remembered he wanted to consult with his girlfriend, because when the young man created a new spell, she would be nearby. She was frightened, not knowing his new plan. It turned out that his desire was to create a spell called Remember. In a past life, someone told the boy that once something entered the brain, it was impossible to forget. It was stored somewhere in the depths of memory. However, now he has been reborn, and he retains memories from his past life. In other words, memory exists not only in the brain, but also in the soul. Reed wondered about a possible way to see such soul memories. Sandra explained that it was similar to the theory of the living soul. The man asked again, indicating a detailed answer was needed. Sandra believed it was one of the torii in the science of magic. The basis of this theory was roughly similar to their own thinking. Reed understood everything, but he considered it one of the philosophies of this world. The boy wondered if this could help. The theory held that life force was the source of magical power and pointed the way to divinity. In other words, as Reed had said earlier, it was the soul. This gave the child an idea. It was possible to influence magical power by altering the soul. However, even if they tried, no one could say what would happen. Reed sat in a meditative position and folded his hands to form a circle. If the source of magical power was the soul or life force, then he needed to concentrate on something deep within his body. After some time of such concentration, the boy felt no changes but decided to continue. The magical power needed to be converted into vital force. But he was also curious where this force would go after that. He needed to sense and feel its flow. Being immersed in the sensations, he discovered that the power was reaching somewhere. The boy opened his eyes and decided that it looked like a hole, but it could be dangerous. Reed suddenly realized he was in a different place with numerous bookshelves before his eyes. Suddenly, a voice rang out, greeting him. At the table in front of him was a child, a spitting image of himself, smiling kindly. The boy decided to ask who it was. The copy hesitated for a moment, then suggested calling itself Memory. It seemed the most appropriate name. The image was the embodiment of Reed's memory, as he had come there specifically to delve into the memories of his past life. The hero wondered if he would really cooperate so easily. The image suggested that he extract the memories himself. It was comparable to searching social networks, so the child had to cope. He closed his eyes and tried to imagine the network. It didn't look difficult, but the main thing was not to lose concentration. Ordinary people couldn't reach this place, but Reed was special. The image asked him to speak directly to it, as memory could find any information in this world. The boy wondered how he could be summoned. But Reed advised simply using magical power. Then the image wanted the hero to listen to its advice. This time he managed to get there, but this place was very fragile and quite dangerous, so the memory asked Reed not to come again. The image reminded him again that if necessary, the hero could call him by name. The boy agreed and thanked him. Then he began to come to his senses, and Sandra called out to him anxiously. The hero was frightened by the surprise and stepped back, thereby frightening the girl as well. He asked her what she was doing. But Sandra herself felt it wasn't her she should have been asking. Her friend explained that the boy had frozen and sat in dead silence. But as soon as she approached, he immediately screamed. Reed apologized for the disruption. The girl stood up and brushed herself off, wondering if his body was okay since the boy had been sitting motionless for quite a long time. He looked at his hands and thought. The last thing his memory told him was that he shouldn't have returned. That world had been fragile enough, so the hero could have been stuck in it forever. Reed hesitated to tell Sandra about this. He answered her question by saying that nothing had worked. She was surprised and then apologized for not being able to help. Sitting on the bed, the child suddenly decided and called upon his memory. He appeared almost immediately and greeted him and expressed surprise at his quick return. Reed was delighted that he actually heard him. The image was indignant. Hadn't the boy believed him before? Then he asked what he was looking for. But the child just wanted to test this method of communication. In that case, the memory asked to be called the next time help was needed and disappeared as suddenly as it appeared. The boy went to visit his mother, and upon entering the room, he immediately asked about her well-being. The woman seemed happy. She told her son that she felt better than before thanks to the medication and asked the assistant for confirmation. The assistant clarified that they were still working on the dosage, but there had been no problems. Looking at them, the hero compared them to two cats. Sandra, noticing this, immediately realized he'd thought something offensive about them. The young man quickly defended himself, saying it was the other way around. Ever since Nonali's near-fatal seizure, the girl had become her attending physician. She'd always been involved in researching magical power, so she was the perfect candidate. Reed had also taught her how to measure power. The boy wanted to complete the cure that would cure his mother as soon as possible. If he succeeded in achieving this, he would be able to help not only her, but also others suffering from this disease. Suddenly a hand fell on his cheek. The woman distracted him from his thoughts. His son was very tense. The child reassured her by saying that he was just thinking, and she asked him not to overexert himself. Sandra reminded the gentleman that it was time for him to go to his father, as he had called him. As they parted, Nonali decided to say hello to Rainer. The man solemnly announced that the date of the trip had been set, and the boy was noticeably nervous. Reed was also planning to go to Renelit to treat his mother. A large amount of moongrass was needed to create the medicine, but it couldn't be grown in their territory because it didn't thrive. This was the main reason for the trip. The country had a developed agricultural sector, and Reed hoped to find a solution there. From memories of his past life, the boy learned that he could find the information he needed there. Rainer admonished his son, saying they couldn't let their guard down. Something was clearly brewing within the country. The young man didn't understand what his father meant. He clarified that King Elias was trying to promote the idea of their country's friendship. However, all the aristocrats shared his point of view. The son asked sullenly who these aristocrats were. Rainer considered the possibility that they were all from his son's fiancée's faction. The boy quickly realized that this meant there would also be those nobles who considered him an unsuitable husband. The local aristocrats' sentiments were understandable. They were dissatisfied with their vassal status and desired independence for their country. However, if this went too far, danger would arise. Reed wondered how his father knew about all this. Rainer believed there were no impenetrable walls. Information could be obtained from any country, and information was what was needed to protect one's home. The son was surprised by Rainer's spies in Renelit. The man considered it a good guess, but didn't say anything directly. The boy himself would have preferred to live in ignorance. The king understood Norris's point of view, but the father of the girl's future husband, Rainer Bardia, who was called the strongest man in the Magnolia Empire. Moreover, it was supposed to be located almost on the border with their country, which meant ideal conditions. Aristocrat Norris Tamasuka saw sense in his words. However, they wanted to marry into the imperial family and weren't satisfied with any fallback option. Other members of the meeting also agreed with him. Norris had always been such a character. He was especially proud of being a dark elf, which is why a whole faction of patriots had formed around him. Through marriage, he planned to establish roots in another country. First, Renalut would cease to be a vassal, and then he would gain control of the empire entirely. Race came in and apologized. The man asked what he wanted. The elf had come to inquire about Farah. Was it true that they were planning to send her away as a hostage and force her into marriage? The father waved it off, not understanding who could have told him such nonsense, but apparently it was Norris. The boy began to get angry because no one had told him this, but the girl was only 6 years old, so it was impossible to send her to a foreign country. Reyes began shouting, unable to comprehend why this was so necessary. The king explained the importance of maintaining a connection with the country of Magnolia, so that when the boy himself became king, he would be able to understand his father's decision. But the young prince refused to accept it. The man frowned, but tried to control himself. His son was still too young and therefore emotional. He sent him back to his room to cool down and get his thoughts in order. He shouldn't have brought this up. The boy walked quickly down the corridor, not even noticing those walking nearby. The girl greeted her brother loudly, which surprised him, as Farah rarely came there. The girl explained that her mother had invited her to come. She, too, was curious about how he had ended up there. The brother told about a conversation with his father during which he lost his temper and his father became angry. Farah was surprised. She couldn't even believe that the king could be angry. Looking at his sister, Reyes considered her very beautiful and like her mother. Despite her young age, she had received a good education, and her every movement was refined and elegant. She was his little sister, of whom the young prince was proud. The attendant informed the princess that it was time to go, so Farah bowed to her brother in farewell. He looked in the direction of his departing sister. The prince was once again convinced at the wrongness of his father's actions. The young prince was determined to protect his little sister. Reed held his head, not understanding what these memories were. Memory is a special magic that the boy invented just the other day to delve into his memories. When he mentally recalled an image, he used it to find the information he needed. During his conversation with the image, the magical power gradually dissipated. But then the hero began to wonder why he had angered the memory so much. Meanwhile, he continued to question it about the plot. Memory couldn't understand what exactly the boy wanted from him since he kept skipping dialogue. Now, even if he searched his memories, all he could find were fragments of information. Reed wasn't paying much attention to the plot due to the game being so interesting, and he was interested in something else. That's why the young man needed help. It was an otome game based on Cinderella, where the love interests were princes from different countries. There was supposed to be a man named Races in Renalut. Still, it was quite difficult. In that case, Reed would like to take the opportunity to learn about his memory in general. The image agreed. He wanted to tell her himself. The boy could only retrieve memories of what he had consciously seen and heard in his past life, such as videos he had watched on the internet, the contents of school textbooks, complaints from colleagues, uninteresting advertisements, conversations of passers-by, and so on. The comparison was odd. It was like reconstructing a torn document. Memory could try, but it still waited for precise instructions. The hero incredulously asked if he could ask for such a thing. During training, the teacher asked the gentleman to carefully watch his movements, but the boy found this difficult. He fell onto the grass, practically exhausted. But suddenly the man began to say that it was time to learn to strengthen his body with magic. Magical power conversion enhances combat skills, but without proper skills, it's of little use. Reed needed to imagine his body as stronger. He wasn't entirely clear on the concept, but his teacher explained that simply channeling mania through his body wouldn't work. He needed to feel the movement of magic throughout his entire body and muscles. Knights were often told to feel, not to do. In other words, muscles, not heads. Once the boy learned to do this trick, he would stop running out of breath too quickly. He needed to remember this rule. Suddenly, the young man noticed that Rubens used the same thing in his fights with him. That's why the man never tired during long training sessions. He possessed inexhaustible stamina, unlike his student, who quickly ran out of steam. So, Reed had no chance of winning. He threatened the teacher as soon as he learned to use body strengthening, he would definitely defeat him. Rubens accepted his challenge, but first he needed to learn how to distribute magical power. Then the man called him to an obstacle course. The hero began to feel that his fatigue had diminished, and the man was pleased with the speed of his absorption. It was probably also because of his training with Sandra, because the mage warriors were amazing. Reed admired Rubens's abilities. If he had the same, he would have become a true genius. The teacher encouraged him, as success was just around the corner. The man was surprised that the young man had coped with his training without strengthening his body. Later, it was time to move on to the next stage. The boy had to push himself as hard as he could without tiring. He began running, his magical power coursing through his body. Then he did exercises without covering the flow of magic, and when he mastered all the techniques, the time came for a duel with Rubens. They fought vigorously, and the hero promised his teacher that things would be different. But Rubens wasn't about to give up easily either, as he hadn't lost yet. After strengthening his body, training became noticeably more enjoyable, and Reed began to feel much less fatigue. There was still a difference in experience, height and weight between them, but there was still a chance of winning, although not in a fair fight. The boy felt the will to win being born in his heart. But at that moment, while he was thinking, the weapon was knocked out of his hand. But the chance was still there. He needed to use his childish advantages to evade the attack. The move failed. The man grabbed him behind his back. The idea was good, but the execution was poor. So Reed lost. The teacher praised the student for not giving up after their sword clash. His technique was worth using against less capable fighters. The young man demanded another round, but it was time to finish. So the man clarified that it was him who needed to finish. Next, Reed needed a special teacher, and they had become too accustomed to each other. It dawned on the boy, and he became scared. Apparently, this was only the beginning. He found it hard to believe, considering how difficult the previous training had been. Suddenly, a man approached them and apologized for the delay due to the need to finish the work. Rainer arrived at the training ground, and Rubens informed him that they were finished. The boy was surprised to see his father. The father wanted to personally witness his son's abilities, so he had to fight at full strength. The hero didn't expect that the first person he would have to fight after his teacher would be his own parent. But inside, a desire flared up to check how much stronger Rainer was than his child. The boy armed himself again and rushed forward, attacking first. The father defended himself immediately, admiring his offspring's strength at such a young age, having guessed that he had absorbed the enhancement. The man even joked, but he was beginning to be afraid. No matter how you look at it, the man was still stronger. The boy was finding it harder to parry his blows, and soon he was completely exhausted. Rainer tried to irritate him, teasing him about how the end had come too quickly. After this, he himself decided to go on the attack, but his son found it increasingly difficult to bear. Reed ended up losing his blade, but he still had his fists, which he intended to use. However, his father was surprised by his desire to continue the fight after the sword's flood. The boy sank to his knees, his fatigue growing more pronounced, as he could have fought longer against Rubens. Rainer wanted to know the extent of his son's courage, but his son didn't quite understand. The man asked if he knew what it was. The son believed it was a fortitude that never wavered, and that definition was apt, but it depended on one's understanding. Reed's father promised him that he would have the opportunity to experience this feeling in real combat. Courage determined whether a man lived or died. Rainer wanted to test his son, so he took out a real saber. He checked the blade, which was in good condition, but the boy startled him and asked why his father needed a real blade. The man chuckled and asked him to consider it training. Then he told Reed to listen to him carefully, to stand straight and still without looking away and to watch his movements. And finally the time came to begin, and the hero began to get nervous. Reed felt a strange feeling, as if his father was intimidating him with his aura. Rainer swung his sword and aimed the blow straight at his son. The boy's tears began to flow. He closed his eyes in fear and fell back. However, the blade stopped, and the father looked at it silently. Later, the man told him that he was indeed his age. He ordered Reed to stand up, not understanding why he closed his eyes since he had been told not to look away. The hero apologized for the first time he had ever felt the intent to kill, and he was afraid of a real sword. The boy felt as if his father was actually going to kill him, even though he knew he would. The man reassured his son, saying that everyone was like that at first. The fear he felt was something he would have to overcome in the future to gain courage. But without this feeling, the boy would always be gripped by terror, which meant he would quickly perish. But living without fear was also impossible, as it could lead to recklessness. Therefore, Reed needed to learn to control his senses, and Reiner had come precisely to teach him. Then the man asked the boy with a smile if he didn't mind, but he asked him again to teach him everything. Rubens clarified that the gentleman's methods were unique, and he wouldn't be able to help if something happened. Then the teacher wished him luck. His father was about to swing again, but this time Reed had to keep his eyes open and watch his movements closely. But as soon as the blade moved towards him, he closed his eyes again. He constantly felt as if the sword was about to hit him. The hero was scared and his whole body was shaking, but he understood that this was a necessary measure to increase his survivability in battle. Thoughts were playing in my head about not closing my eyes and being sure to watch the sword. Reed was able to look straight ahead and began to follow the trajectory of his father's blade. The weapon missed its target, stopping just a few touches from the hero's face, his gaze fearless. Reiner was pleased that his son was already beginning to get used to it. The next step was Rubens. The boy understood that this was not the end. The man drew a line, then Reed had to go beyond it and get to Rubens while he himself would attack all the time. He then added that this should not be a problem for the young man if he carefully monitored his movements. Reed understood everything. He had no other choice. The teacher clenched his fist tighter and mentally wished his student good luck. The hero moved forward, and his father began to attack with his weapon. The boy did not stop moving. The blade was so close that the youth involuntarily began to fear. However, thanks to the first lesson, his eyes had already become accustomed, thereby giving him a chance to win. The main thing was to keep an eye on the sword. The boy suddenly called out happily to the teacher, holding out his arms for a hug, and the man also extended his hand. The child jumped straight into Rubens's arms. The man burst into tears, praising the young master for his success. Reed considered his father's fencing to be ruthless, and until his training, he had only trained with wooden swords. Reiner announced the end of the training session and promised to try to participate in every time they would conduct the same training as this one. This stunned the boy. Rubens told the boy what his father would have been unlikely to say himself. He was actually glad to be training together, as the man had long wanted to conduct an exercise together. Reed understood everything. He looked delighted. However, the father, as always, could not show his feelings. Suddenly, someone called Reed's name. He turned around and saw a girl walking toward them, accompanied by a woman. He asked Mel what was going on. The sister puffed out her cheeks in displeasure. She began to scold her dad for torturing her brother. The maid decided to explain everything herself. Mrs. Maldy really wanted to see her brother, but since training was going on, she could only watch from the sidelines. The girl took the boy by the arm and pulled him along, announcing that the training was over. Later, the hero explained to his sister that his father had done this deliberately to toughen him up, so he shouldn't have said such things. Despite her hatred, Mel understood and agreed. The man sat alone and suffered from the fact that his daughter hated him. But suddenly the door opened and a girl entered. The father was frightened by the surprise. She came to explain herself to her father because she had no hatred towards him at all, and then asked for forgiveness. Then the girl reported to the maid about her task, and she praised her. Reiner covered his eyes with his hand, still feeling hurt. Mel asked her brother to come back quickly, and he asked him to look after everything he left for her. Reiner stood silently to the side and watched the children. The boy decided to push his sister towards him. The daughter came up to her father and suddenly hugged him. She asked him to come back quickly. The man's heart began to melt. He took the girl in his arms and promised that one leg would be with them. The other would be there. Maldi was very happy with this promise. Sandra assured that Nunnally could be left entirely in her care. Then the girl reminded Reed about what concerned magic, but he already knew everything himself. The woman watched from the window as the preparations proceeded. Rubens announced that it was time to head to Renalit. While Reed was traveling to the country in a carriage, two monsters met in the Forest of Evil to the east of Renalut. A small lump of slime was about to enter the hole under the tree. A huge evil snake monster suddenly crawled out from there. Slime didn't expect to meet a green snake in those places. She was caught off guard. She didn't want to be eaten and die. The monster charged, but out of nowhere a cat appeared and struck the reptile. The slime looked on in confusion as the newly appeared beast destroyed the green snake, after which he began to eat the flesh, which was surprising to her. Slime admired how cool this black cat was. The animal also wondered where such a monster as Slime had come from. In that forest where many monsters lived, this species was the most numerous and was at the bottom of the food chain. Typically, the slime accumulated magical power and then split it to reproduce. But this particular specimen already had a lot of magic inside, but for some reason it wasn't splitting it. Due to the large amount of power, something like emotions was born inside this body. Dragons and other monsters killed the slime's allies, and as they watched, fear began to grow inside one of them. She was forced to live as a victim, in constant fear of those stronger than her, so she decided to separate from the others. The slime decided that if she remained in plain sight, she would surely be eaten. While the monster lived peacefully and hid, its natural enemy, the green snake, found it. The black cat decided to ask why the slime was following him, but there was no answer. Then he turned around and saw it creeping away. The beast allowed her to enter, thinking that if she were left to her own devices, the slime would simply be eaten, and the cat would then not be able to sleep normally. Thus began the strange cohabitation of Slime and the black cat. He allowed her to live nearby, and if water was scarce, he would simply drink it. The beast returned and brought food with him. But upon entering the hole, he saw that the slime had brought order everywhere. She tried and swallowed the remains of food and bones, which surprised the cat. He gave her a leg to eat. It was thanks for cleaning, and he hadn't brought the meat on purpose. The cat curled up, looking proud, watching his companion devour the food. Black cats were good at cleaning, so he allowed her to stay in the burrow, but it needed cleaning. Then the beast decided to make sure his words were understood. From that moment on, the black cat hunted and the slime cleaned, and that's how they lived. They couldn't speak the same language, but they could understand each other. The black cat was sleeping peacefully when they started to wake him up because it was time to go hunting. He sleepily replied that he would go when he was hungry. Soon it dawned on him, and he realized, stunned, that it was Slime. She too was surprised that he could hear her voice. It was clear it was magic. The slime was unusual. The cat had never heard of anything like it. She was surprised but pleased. The slime had been wanting to talk to him the entire time they lived together. The cat believed that this desire for her was the trigger, and that's how she acquired this ability. This delighted the slime, giving it hope that one day it might take on a form similar to its neighbor. The cat liked the idea, and even dreamed that it would one day become his sweet wife. Slime was going to pray for this every day. Slime and the black cat continued to live. They got along well with each other. There were rumors that even too much. The forest was very dangerous, so he trolled me and led her to a place where it was safer and there were fewer monsters. Slime asked who was in charge there, but her neighbor drove them all away. And finally, they arrived. The slime told him it wanted to show him something, and it began to transform. The next moment, the neighbor turned into a white cat. The black cat froze in shock. Then she asked how the result had turned out, as the cat had tried to create sulfur fur but had only succeeded in making it white. The beast considered this transformation perfect. Then he added that she was very sweet. But then the slime reminded him of the promise he had made. He remembered how he wanted her to become his wife if he transformed. The cat pressed her ears back, upset that he didn't remember. But he suddenly began to insist he hadn't forgotten anything. The cat wondered, was it his race or his appearance that attracted him to this creature? The slime had learned magic to assume a form similar to his. It had worked so hard for him. This touched the black cat, and he turned to his neighbor. He asked the cat to become his wife and live their whole lives together, and tears welled up in the slime's eyes. The cat asked again if he minded. She was certainly happy, but she was still Slime. He confidently declared that he wouldn't repeat it twice since he meant what he said, so she should agree. Slime cried harder. She clung to the cat and confessed her feelings. And so, in the Forest of Evil, a strange love was born between a slime and a cat. Then they will meet a human child who will feel a strange power. But that will be a completely different story. The Baldia family's expedition to Renault included Reed, Rayner, Rubens, Diana, and the Knights. The Christie Merchant Guild also traveled with them to establish trade relations with the country. They continued their journey safely. The group reached a rest stop halfway through the journey. The boy became seasick and ill. He never would have imagined that riding in a wagon could be so excruciatingly difficult. His father joked that he had now received his baptism of fire. The boy wanted to go and rest first, and upon entering the room, he immediately fell onto the bed. Then the youth called upon his memory. He responded immediately, and just thought that he would soon be called. The hero asked how things were going with the search for the memories he requested. But the answer wasn't encouraging. Nothing worthwhile had been found yet. But Reed didn't give up and figured there had to be something. Clues, like a name or a conversation about the place they were heading to. The prince of the country, Race, lived there. Renault twins of the country, Race, lived there. Renault. The memory also said that his sprite from the game surfaced, and Reed wanted to look at it. They showed him the prince's appearance, and he thought he looked cool. Black hair, yellow eyes, the classic dark elf tan everything looked good. But if they could meet him, they had to remember him. However, given Race's gaze, he could be a tsundere. Becoming the half-brother of such a creature wasn't the most pleasant thing. The boy thanked his memory for helping him find him. There was a knock on the door, and when the boy opened the door, he saw an elf girl. She apologized for disturbing him while he was resting. She extended her hand and clarified that she wanted to give him some lozenges. Chris had made them herself from medicinal herbs, and then heard about motion sickness as she often experienced it herself. The boy was delighted that the elf had tried so hard for him. He considered her a goddess, and the girl added that she always carried them with her, and she also hoped that he would like them. Reed thanked her friend and promised to start promoting her with all her might. The Renault outpost was already visible ahead. There was one detail in Flutterella that was completely unrelated to the plot, but it caused a lot of discussion among players. This detail turned out to be the Dark Elves. Looking at them, it seemed as if the East and the West were in one bottle, which caused even more delight in the hero. The locals were a mixed bag. Some wore kimonos, others were dressed similarly to Reed, like Japan after the Meiji Restoration. Reiner explained that it all stemmed from the fact that after the incident in Barlstill, Renault had formed an alliance with Magnolia and begun to adopt its culture. It was a great opportunity to broaden his horizons. The boy excitedly asked his father to look. There were rice fields nearby. The man chuckled. In their country, you really don't meet them, whereas in this one, it's a common thing. Reed liked this. He even decided to ask Chris to establish trade in order to bring rice to the lands of Baldia. He also happened to see a huge castle, within whose walls those who disapproved of his union with the princess were already waiting for them. The boy decided to brace himself and be on guard. After the ride, Lid stretched his body a bit. The maid said they had arrived at the guest house where the hero would be staying, and went to call the person in charge. A dark elf approached the boy and greeted him on his arrival in Renault. The man introduced himself as Zach Riverton. He was the manor's manager and the guest's escort. Liner told the elf they were counting on him and told Lid that the man had already helped them during the exchange of information between the capital and Renault. Zach, however, believed he was merely acting as a carrier pigeon. The manager told the guest that the mansion was decorated in a style reminiscent of a magnolia and also boasted hot springs. Lid called the place a paradise. When he got to his room, he lay down on the bed. He was glad they had finally arrived. Diana came in dressed as a maid. The boy asked why she was dressed like that. The girl explained that while they were in Renault, she would be the master's bodyguard and servant, and added that the boy should not hesitate to ask her for help. Reed replied that he would rely on her and asked if the knight could truly fight in such attire. The girl lifted the hem of her dress and revealed the weapon strapped to her hip, asking her master not to worry. Diana continued to show what she'd managed to hide under her dress. Reed stopped her and said he'd figured it out. Diana asked if he was sure. The hero asked Diana why she had so many hidden weapons. He didn't think knights even used them. The girl agreed with him. She explained that men and women are built differently, and it's not always possible to win a podium in a head-on collision. For Diana, concealed weapons were a way to compensate for the difference in strength when competing with men. The girl was willing to do anything to join the knightly order. Reed asked if she'd gone to all this trouble for Rubens. Diana smiled and suggested that might be true. She remembered little Rubens. The girl suddenly protested, saying she was doing this primarily for herself. Diana reminded him that while they were in Renalet, she would be his master's servant and asked for his favor. The knight was ordered to remain in the same room with the hero, so she asked to be considered heir. Reed thought she was still too noticeable. The boy planned to get some sleep and told her to wake him if anything happened. When night fell, someone entered the princess's room and announced that the Baldia family had arrived at the guest mansion. Escorting the princess who was about to marry the Prince of Magnolia was a task that meant they wanted to get rid of the people. When the girl was sent to the groom's country, her personal guard would follow her. The knight understood everything immediately when her father suggested this task. She assumed her brothers, envious of their sister's skill, had complained about her. Sometimes the girl felt resentment, but did nothing about it. The most important thing for 12-year-old Asna Landmark was developing his skills to become the princess's sword. The woman yelled at the girl for having too soft a corner of her right hand. She reminded her that she was a princess and therefore had to understand her role. The girl apologized. The woman continued shouting, saying that a princess should be a role model for the people and that mistakes were unacceptable. Asen tried to stop the teacher's outburst. The girl thought this was too harsh a word for the princess. The woman replied that it was an order from His Majesty and Lady Ultia, and asked if the knight had any problems with it. She told the girl that they had wasted time due to her inattention. The princess apologized again. The lesson lasted from morning until evening. In addition to teaching Renalut, she studied the culture of the Magnolia estate, the government, and the aristocratic lands. Asna realized the rumors about the princess's future marriage to the Empire were true. She'd been told that Farah had lived like this even before she became her bodyguard. Spending more and more time with the girl, she began to want to be her support. As Asna and Farah were getting ready for bed, the knight asked if the princess was comfortable. The girl replied that she was already used to it and thanked the bodyguard for his concern. Farah said she just had to be patient and try. The girl admitted that when her parents ignored her, she felt sad and began to cry. Asna hugged the princess. Farah recalled her mother's words about her future fiancé being the Prince of Magnolia. The woman had warned the girl not to become attached to the Margrave's son. Until now, her mother had been the one deciding what she should wear and eat. Farah had no choice in life, but she wanted to decide for herself what to do with this man. She recalled how they secretly traveled to the Baltic lands to experience the atmosphere of Magnolia before the wedding. Seeing the world for the first time, the princess was thrilled. She wondered if the boy who had helped her back then still lived in that country. She hoped he was doing well and that they would meet someday. Reed examined the girl's painting. He called the work beautiful and skillful. Zach asked if he liked the painting. The boy replied that it depicted a very beautiful woman. Diana remarked that the young gentleman was a romantic. Reed denied this, saying he was simply admiring her. The mansion's manager explained that the painting depicted Lady Elphia, Lord Elias's concubine. He added that this woman was Princess Farah's mother. The boy was embarrassed by the thought of falling in love with his future wife's mother. Reed said the daughter looked very much like her mother. Zach said that in that case he would appreciate his bride. Reed asked if Zach was against his marriage to the princess. The man replied that he had no right to say anything. He wanted Farah to be happy. The hero understood. He knew that in Renalet, House Baltia was viewed with mixed feelings. His father had told him that His Majesty Elias favored their union. The boy knew he needed to secure the manager's support first. He apologized for raising the issue. Reed said that if the princess looked like the portrait, then it could be called love at first sight, and asked if the man would support him. Zach bowed and said he would be happy to support them. The hero captured the moment the manager gave the message and thanked him. The man came to line and said his son was the true future. The father asked if the boy had done anything wrong. The manager recounted how Reed had asked him to support his love affair with the princess, while also grasping the political situation in Renalet and his position. The father muttered that his son could use some self-control. Zach said he fully supported Reed. The steward was related by blood to the king's concubine Elthia and was the current head of House Riverton. They were also allies of Renault. The organization Zach secretly led was Renalet's intelligence agency. He received orders directly from the king and was close to Elias. Lane was greatly encouraged by the fact that his son had the support of such a man. The men continue their conversation about the upcoming audience with the king and Norris's actions. The dark elf came to Reyes and apologized for the intrusion. Nerissa reported that everything was going according to plan. The boy thanked him for the news. The man, however, believed he should be the one grateful, since his master had accepted his offer. Now he could be of use to him. Reyes asked if father had been to Lady Altia's again. Norris muttered that the king had shown no regard for Lady Liesel's feelings. The man knew that Reyes and Farah were free siblings. The boy's mother, Queen Liesel, was related to Norris. Since a secret agreement stipulated that the princess would marry Magnolia, Reyes would be the only royal child remaining in Renalet. Norris took advantage of this. He whispered to him that King Elias loved only Lady Altia, that this woman was to blame for Farah not seeing her brother, and that His Majesty only visited Queen Liesel occasionally. Reyes began to notice his mother occasionally smiling sadly. He believed the king had treated a woman unfairly, and he told himself he would never be like his father. Norris approached and said he would always be by his master's side. The man said that if the boy followed his advice, he would become a good king and a good man. The advisor warned Reyes to be careful at the meeting. The boy replied that he knew what he had to do without being reminded. He was determined to protect his sister. Afterward, Norris went outside. A shadow appeared from a crack in the wall. The man asked it about the prince's mood. He was told that the boy trusted Norris implicitly, so there was no doubt he would become suspicious. The man told his assistant to let him know if anything happened. The shadow disappeared. Norris was glad everything was going according to plan. Farah, while dressing, said she felt uneasy. Asna said the clothes suited the princess perfectly. The girl thanked her. She wondered if her fiancé would like them too. The bodyguard said the gentleman would like it. She got down on one knee and said the princess looked especially beautiful today. The mother entered the room. She noticed that her daughter had finally put on the dress she had sent her. The girl thanked the woman for the gift. Watching mother and daughter, Asna admitted to herself that she wouldn't call them family. The elf said Farah had no right to disgrace Renalet, even in front of the Marquis's son. She added that if the girl proved herself worthy, then perhaps an alliance with the royal family would be discussed. Farah replied that she understood everything. Her mother left the room, saying she would go ahead. The girl exhaled. Asana asked if the princess was okay. Farah replied that she was already used to this kind of treatment. The bodyguard said that the young man was a groom candidate, so he shouldn't be too bad. Farah said Asna was a kind girl and asked if she knew anything about their guest. The bodyguard only knew his name and replied that the groom's name was Reed Baldia. The girl walked to the window and repeated Asna's words. Norris approached the king and asked if he could take the initiative to vet the potential groom. Elias agreed. The man thanked His Majesty. The king told Norris to proceed with caution and reminded him that their guest was a nobleman of the empire. Elias planned to marry the queen to a member of the imperial family. This would have given Renalat a real boost to prosperity. The king muttered that no one had any hope of him anyway. Reed stood in front of the mirror, examining his outfit. He wondered if he looked too odd. Diana asked how many times he'd checked his clothes that morning and compared him to a noblewoman going to see a prince. The knight said Reed was a very handsome boy and advised him to stand tall and be himself, no matter his surroundings. She added that clothes were just a shell and the most important thing was who wore them. The hero blushed. Diana approached Reed and touched his face. She said that if he were a girl, he'd be courted from all sides. Zack announced that they needed to get going. Weiner was already waiting outside. Reed shouted that he was coming. As he walked down the stairs, the manager said he had heard that the leader of the opposition, an elderly dark elf named Norris, had come under the influence of Race C. Reed didn't expect the man to extract the information so quickly. The boy thanked him and asked what Altia thought. Zack guessed that the woman wanted Farah to marry into the royal family. However, her goals were different from Norris's. Zack didn't know her true intentions. Reed found the neutrality of this woman, who didn't know him, logical. But his main problem was Rhesus. The hero understood that if the prince was under Norris's influence, he would be hostile. Reed asked Zack what he needed to do to get Rhesus to accept Farah's marriage. The hero wanted the prince to support them. Reyes's heart once. The man said the dark elf was literally blinded by Norris. Zack explained that the prince was intelligent and genuinely cared about the country, but by accident he fell under the influence of an old elf. Reyes's behavior contradicted the image of a prince. Moreover, he was in an unstable mental state. Zack asked Reed to break this influence. He said the hero could consider it a request from the nobility who cared about Renalet's future, and Reed could entrust the rest to him. The hero didn't expect to receive a formal commission from the nobles in response to his simple question. Reed understood that this was his chance to make a name for himself. The boy promised to do his best. Zack was grateful that the hero agreed. Reed asked why Rhesus had become so attached to Norris. The manager apologized and said he wasn't at liberty to discuss it. When Reed came outside, Liner noted with displeasure that his son was making excuses. The boy apologized. Zack said he was going back to the mansion. Reed was surprised the elf wasn't coming with them. The man replied that he would be eager to see how the elf performed. The hero didn't quite understand what he meant. They rode by carriage to the palace, where they would meet with King Elias. Reed thought they would be taken to a large castle, but instead saw that it was used as a strategic fort. Upon arrival, Strada asked if this was Marquis Liner Bardia. The man confirmed and replied that he was requesting an audience with His Majesty Elias. The guards said they had been expecting them and warned them to leave their weapons. Liner said that he, Reed, Diana, and Rubens would go to the king and ordered the others to wait for them outside. Before entering the building, security asked guests to remove their shoes. Guests were escorted to the door and informed that they were expected. The doors opened. Guards and royal family confidants stood behind them. Everyone watched the new arrivals closely. Some felt suspicion, interest, distrust, or even curiosity. Liner called his son forward. They saw only one chair. Norris explained that they had received word that only the Marquis would be attending the audience with the king, so the single chair had been prepared. Liner asked Reed what he thought about it. From the tone of his voice, the son could tell his father was furious. The hero said he'd simply stand next to Liner. Reed noticed the way Norris was looking at him and realized the elf didn't particularly like him. The knights were furious, so the master asked them to calm down. Liner sat down on a chair and told his son to keep his head down until told to. He advised him to kneel and bow slightly, which Reed did. Everyone bowed. It was announced that Liner, Marquis of the Borderlands, had arrived from the Baldia domain of the Magnolia Empire. The doors opened, and the royal family appeared before everyone. His Majesty ordered everyone to raise their heads. Elias greeted Liner and apologized for the pomp of the occasion. The Marquis replied that it was perfectly natural for the princess's fiancé. The king asked if his son was standing next to Liner. Reed introduced himself. He explained how he'd heard his father talk about Princess Farah and had come to greet the king. The boy was counting on His Majesty's blessing. Elias remembered that Reed was the same age as Rhesus and asked how old he was. The boy replied that he was 6. His Majesty turned to his daughter and asked her to introduce herself. The girl said she was the princess of the kingdom of Renalet, daughter of King Elias Farah. She was so pleased to meet them that her ears began to tremble. Her mother reprimanded her and the daughter calmed down. Reed wondered what that meant. Farah's mother, Eltia Riverton, introduced herself. Behind her was Rhesus, the princess's brother, and his mother, Liesel. The king also introduced himself and said he would like to maintain good relations with the Lord. Reed was asked how he felt about their proposal. The hero was not expecting such a direct question. Reyes couldn't resist telling his father he was being too playful and asking why he was asking such a question of a child. Norris backed him up. Reed realized the old elf didn't want the boy to make an impression. He decided he needed to focus on the prince. The hero was about to do what Norris feared most. He declared that this alliance between Renalet and House Baldia must take place at any cost. The courtiers were surprised, and the king asked for more. The hero explained that Renalet and the Baldian lands bordered each other, so by strengthening their ties, they could create a deterrent for neighboring states. Barlst was an example of this. The king said they were already free with their empire and asked if that wasn't enough. He wondered if they couldn't trust Magnolia. Reed explained that from Barlst's point of view, they might have felt that their alliance with Magnolia was lacking efficiency, and that marrying their neighbors, Baldia, could change things radically. Baldia was a Margraviate with the right to independently mobilize an army in the event of a threat. After marriage, under the protection of his wife and the allied state, he could respond quickly without waiting for imperial orders. The nobles agreed. Reed declared that Baldia would raise its forces in the event of an attack on Renalut. If Balst believed in their alliance, this would strengthen their deterrence, something no dynastic marriage with the imperial house could achieve. Rhys declared the Lord was talking nonsense. He said they could act without marriage, since they already had an alliance. Reed agreed with him and said he wanted to show how Balst would take it. He noted that the alliance itself would not allow Baldia to join immediately. The hero explained that when using troops, defense was the primary focus. If the enemy attacked only their border, they wouldn't be able to act without official orders. Reed asked his father if he was right. Liner told the king to ignore the child's words. He added that, nevertheless, the influence of marriage on moderation could not be discounted. His Majesty, let us clarify if they believe this will be predominantly against Barlstoi. Reed replied that there were other arguments, but he would discuss them after the marriage. Elias laughed at the reply. He remarked that the Margrave's son was very clever, adding that he wouldn't sleep peacefully if the Lord were their enemy. Norris reminded the king that these were just the words of a child. His Majesty noted that Liner also approved of this and advised his son to broaden his horizons. Elias told the Margrave that this was a reasonable and practical argument. Norris turned to the king and said something. The king remarked that words were only valuable when backed by strength and valor. He was counting on a combination of sword and wit. Elias extended his hand and expressed a desire to see the Lord's fighting skills. Reed entered the field while everyone waited for the fight. He couldn't understand how a meeting with Princess Farah had turned into a duel at court. Diana handed the wooden sword to the master. The boy thanked her. The girl assumed someone had wanted to disgrace Reed, which was why the equipment was so poorly prepared, and that she had personally selected his weapons. The hero was surprised that the girl even bothered to do this. Diana told the master not to spare anyone who was rude. While warming up, Reed noticed the royal family arguing about something, which was why the duel hadn't started. The king apologized to Reed and informed him that they were forced to urgently change his opponent. The man said that his son, Rhesus, would now be fighting him. Renelut. Reed couldn't believe he'd have to fight the prince. Lubens and Diana clenched their fists and wished their master luck. The hero recalled Zack's words about breaking Erase's heart first, a request from the nobles who cared about Reneluti's future. Reed realized that Zack had known all along. The dark elf asked why the boy was grinning. The hero said he'd simply remembered something funny. Rhesus muttered that he didn't like his opponent anymore. The king announced that the duel between Mr. Reed and his son would now begin. The rules were simple. The fight would end if one of them surrendered, or if it became impossible to continue. The hero raised his hand and said he had one suggestion before the battle began. He wanted His Majesty Elias to be the only one to decide when the battle should end. Reed noted that this was a rather important duel and didn't want anyone to interfere. Norris, observing him, considered the boy's behavior insolent. The king agreed to the condition. Reyes said with a smile that the hero had lost when he set foot on their territory and advised him to return back to Magnolia. Reed understood the prince's feelings about his domain, but he chose not to respond to the child's words. Rhesus remembered that his opponent's mother was gravely ill, and asked how the son of an ailing mother could even fight. The dark elf said it would be better for Reed to stay near his mother, as that suited him better. The hero tried not to react to the provocation. The Baldia estate, but he wasn't about to forgive Rhesus for his words about his mother fighting for her life. The dark elf asked if the boy had anything to say. The hero understood that Norris had provoked the prince. The duel began. Norris hoped the naive Rhesus would succeed. The prince said that if Reed surrendered now, they would spare him unnecessary pain. The hero told the elf not to bother himself, and asked if he was strong only through words. Rhesus was indignant and reminded him that he had treated the human well. Reed noticed that the prince's kindness to him was only in words. Rhesus raised his wooden sword and ran toward his opponent. When the prince was close to the hero, he grabbed him by the robe and threw him over his shoulder. Everyone was caught by the event. Reed pressed his sword to his throat and asked the prince if they were finished. The elf grew angry and told him not to dare mock him. He took a stance and resolved that next time he would not underestimate the human. Reed beckoned his opponent toward him. The prince grew angry and told him not to act like a hero. The boy noticed that the dark elf hadn't even landed a punch. Reyes lunged at Reed. The hero blocked the blow with his sword. The elf said he would win if they crossed swords. The boy knew the prince intended to overpower him by force. Rill threw the sword back, causing Reyes, who had been pressing hard against it, to lose his footing and fall to the ground. The sword fell from the elf's hands. The hero pressed the weapon to his opponent's neck and declared that the prince's words were not matched by his actions. The spectators couldn't understand what this meant. The knights were happy for their master. Reyes wanted to say something but couldn't. Reed wanted to make the prince understand the colossal difference in level between them. He told the elf to stand up and reminded him that he was the Prince of Renelut. Reed asked if Reyes was going to lose to the son of an ailing mother, reminding him that he had rigged him a fake wooden sword and donned the armor and uniform himself. The hero asked if the elf had any shame. He shouted for the prince to rise, declaring that he would never forgive him otherwise. Reyes remained silent. The hero wanted to crush his pride. Noticing that the elf was unwilling to rise, Reel said that if the boy wasn't going to fight, he could simply admit defeat. The hero added that in that case, Reyes would be a pathetic and weak-willed coward. The Lord admitted that he saw in the prince a wise king like his father, Elias. The elf rose to his feet and took up his sword. He shouted at Reed's back that he would definitely defeat him. Looking at the prince, the hero saw his gaze change. He said he accepted the challenge. The fight continued. Reyes attacked Reed, who skillfully defended himself with his sword. He dodged and knocked the prince off his feet. He fell and rose. Watching the duel, Farah couldn't believe her brother couldn't stand up to Reed. Asna wondered what kind of training made someone so strong. She loved to know. Reyes fell again. His sister couldn't understand why he continued fighting when he could have ended the fight at any moment. Asna assumed Reed wasn't interested in either victory or defeat. The princess asked what she meant. The girl explained that the master's goal was to demonstrate his skill, so he couldn't afford to do it on purpose. However, the boy had no intention of brutally defeating the prince. Reed had no choice but to force Reyes to admit defeat or wait for His Majesty's decision. Farah was glad to hear Reed wasn't acting out of malice. Asna said he was most likely trying to teach the princess's brother a lesson. The bodyguard noticed Norris abruptly leave. Farah asked the girl what was wrong. Asna said the noble family had been acting suspiciously lately, so she was going to follow them. Ridu lost count of how many times the prince had dropped his sword during the duel. The situation was becoming tense as Reyes refused to retreat, no matter how many times he fell. The king was also in no hurry to intervene. The hero asked again if the elf would accept defeat. Reyes raised his sword and called the man a monster. Reed caught the blow with his own weapon and replied that he was most likely a demon to the prince. The hero threw the elf over his shoulder. Seeing that Reyes wasn't going to give in, Reed decided to try a different approach. He asked the prince if his words about the hero's mother were his original idea, or if someone had suggested it to him. Reed demanded an answer and asked if Norris had put him up to it. The prince didn't answer, but the hero understood everything from his expression. The hero asked if Reyes could admit defeat already, warning that otherwise everything would end badly. The prince shouted that he would never do that. Reed sighed and suddenly grasped his hand. He declared that he had lost the duel to Reyes, who was lying on the ground. The prince was surprised. After the duel, everyone gathered in the meeting room. Elias asked why Reed had announced his defeat. The boy replied that the king already knew the answer. The man understood that Reyes had suffered a complete defeat. He knew his son had fought with honor, but in the end, due to his stubbornness, the boy continued to refuse to lose. His Majesty asked if his opponent was suggesting he admit defeat. Reyes replied that his father was right. He admitted that he continued fighting only for his own pride. He felt Reed was fighting half-heartedly. Elias, however, thought his son was smarter. Liesel supported him, reminding him how Reyes had declared before the battle that he wanted to fight. Reed realized that this was what the queen had argued with the king about before the battle. His Majesty asked why the Lord had entered the battle in this manner, since he could have easily knocked out Reyes. The hero realized he would have to explain it to the king himself. Reed asked everyone to leave, including his father. He wanted to repeat the conversation privately with the royal family. Liner, seeing that his son had a plan, advised him to speak to the end. When everyone had left, Elias asked for the reason for such behavior. Reed explained that before the fight, Reyes had advised him to return to Magnolia. For a prince of a certain country, especially at a diplomatic reception, this was an extremely careless act. Reed said that if that had been all it took, he couldn't ignore Rias's next words. Liesel asked what else her son had said. Reed explained how the prince had called him the son of an ailing mother. He was a gentleman who couldn't handle a sword. The hero declared that such words were unforgivable. As a member of the Baldia family, he could not tolerate such treatment. The queen burst into tears. Elias asked her son if this was true. Rhesus remained silent. The man said it was a disgrace. The king recalled how he had taught the prince that one must always answer for one's words and actions. He said that Rhesus had spoken with a nobleman from an allied state who was also his sister's fiancé. The man asked how his son could allow himself to speak such words. Reed decided there was no point in clearing the hall. Rhesus remained silent. Elias stood, took the sword, and said that if his son couldn't even answer him, then he had no use for him. Rias apologized. His father asked why his son had acted so foolishly. The prince said that marrying his little sister to a common nobleman was not advisable, but rather to a member of the imperial family, which would be for the benefit of Renarit's future. Elias realized that his son was under Norris's influence and explained that Rhesus wanted to send Farah to a den of intrigue, even worse than Renarut, to a world where she would become nothing more than a flunky. Realizing his mistake, the boy began to shake. He thought marriage to the Empire could bring happiness to Farah. The king said the prince shouldn't use words he heard from someone else. Race began to cry and scream. He finally realized his mistake. Having calmed down, the elf turned to Lord Reed and knelt before him. He bowed low before the hero and acknowledged his mistake. Rhesus admitted that he had allowed others' words to influence him, causing him to say something he had no right to. The prince apologized. Reed said that was no longer necessary. Elias reminded that his apology alone was not enough. He also had to apologize on behalf of the state. Reyes replied that he understood. The prince told Reed that he had no doubt his master could make his sister happy. The boy asked him to take care of the girl. The king raised his sword. Rhesus apologized to his father for the trouble he had caused. The queen rushed to stop her husband. Reed, however, compared the situation to historical dramas and thought it was about to be complete seppuku. Liesel grabbed her husband's leg and began begging for mercy for the child, who had simply stumbled. Rhesus said he should be punished for what he had done. The prince said he had one last request, for the king to take care of his mother and love her as much as he loved Lady Eltia. Elias said he had never once favored any of his beloved wives, and explained that his son had simply been manipulated. Reed saw the king about to strike Rashis with his sword. He wanted to stop him. Reed shielded Rhesus from the sword, determined to establish the king. The boy said he didn't wish such a punishment on his opponent in battle. The hero explained that the Or fought with the principal only to make him repent and reminded him that he and his sister would have a marriage, so he would not want to lose Rhesus because of something like that. Reed said that only those present knew about this, which is why he asked his father to leave the room. The king paused for thought. The hero noticed the man's doubts. The gentleman said that in exchange for leaving everything unscathed, he had several requests. He simply asked to listen to them and understand the decision. Elias sheathed his sword and told Reed to speak. The boy thought the king had been waiting for Liner's son to do so. Reed wanted His Majesty to become a patron of Christie's trading company. He had heard that new companies were viewed with prejudice in Renarode, so he asked for the king's support. Elias agreed and told Reed to bring a representative next time. The boy thanked him. Finally, he could give Christie some good news. The second request was for Reed and Farah's engagement to be recognized. His Majesty asked if this price was acceptable. The hero replied that if the royal family approved, he would consider the marriage effectively sealed. Reed asked if he could speak a few words privately with the king. He approached His Majesty and whispered something in his ear. Elias said he had no objections and approved of the marriage with his daughter. However, he warned them that it couldn't be announced and asked them to keep it between them. Reed replied that he would convey the news to his father personally. The final condition was to spare Prince Race from punishment. The king asked what his plan was. Reed explained that he didn't want to lose someone who could become his brother. He understood that the prince had succumbed to a bad influence. The boy asked what Race himself thought of this. The elf replied that he was deeply touched by such a generous pardon and was sincerely grateful. The prince promised to take advantage of the opportunity. The king said that now that the darkness had lifted, his son would surely cope. His Majesty declared the matter closed and warned him not to disclose it to anyone. As he watched the hero shake Elias's hand, Rhazes realized that he could never match Lord Reed in wisdom, in skill, in greatness as a man. The boy left the hall and met his father. He thought that with the end of the duel, everything had finally been settled. Farah and Asna were walking towards them. Reed didn't understand why she was there. The girls approached Allure. The princess asked if he would agree to duel her bodyguard. During the fight between Reed and Rhesus, Norris left the field. He couldn't believe that the prince, a skilled swordsman and the elder, was losing to the Margrave's son. He was certain everything would have worked out if the wooden sword hadn't hit the maid. When Diana saw the weapon, she asked if they considered it acceptable to show such disrespect to her master. Norris asked what she was talking about, as her accusations could also be considered rude. The knight began examining the wooden sword. She gripped it in her hands and snapped it in half, something the dark elf hadn't expected. The girl noted that even a weak soldier like herself could easily break her weapon. She asked if Norris didn't consider such combat preparation an insult. The man assumed it was simply a mistake and said he'd bring another sword. Diana suggested he take her to the vault so she could choose the master's weapon herself. Norris was displeased with this interference. He went out into the yard, approached the fence, and began calling his assistant to come out. A shadow appeared on the fence. She asked why he was calling her here. Norris apologized and explained that he was in a difficult situation. He asked if the shadow had any good advice. The assistant was surprised that the elf couldn't handle such a simple task and suggested he had overestimated Norris. The man protested, saying the Margrave's son was a monster. The shadow offered him some advice. She said that the nobles, whether they accepted the marriage or were neutral, would be displeased to see the prince beaten again and again. Considering the king wasn't stopping the fights, the prince wouldn't surrender. He would be tortured forever longer. Shadow added that Norris should spread rumors after the duel. Farah came to Reed and asked him to duel Asna, her bodyguard. The king told his daughter that dueling at court was not a sport. The girl asked to listen. She said that evil rumors had been spreading in the hall, and she wanted to dispel them with a new battle. His Majesty prophesied to tell her in more detail. Farah said they were tracking a nobleman, but lost him along the way. She and Asna overheard people discussing how the Margrave's son had been torturing the prince, enjoying it cruelly and mercilessly. The courtiers believed Reed was deliberately displaying his power and would take the princess hostage after the marriage. The people wanted the princess to marry into the imperial family. These rumors were heard by Asna and Farah. The princess noted that their opponents had already begun to act. If things continued as they had, they might eventually achieve their goal. Asta reported that Norris was at the forefront of the chaos. This was a grave situation for Queen Liesel and Rias. The king said he understood the situation and asked what the fight between Asna and Reed had to do with it. Farah replied that they had devised this plan together. The princess wanted to gather the nobility again to explain why the fight with Rhesus took a drag, thereby dispelling the rumors. And to reassure the doubters, the bodyguard wanted to stage a real duel with Reed. This way, they would prove the prince wasn't lying or exaggerating his strength. Farah said that this way they would protect both their honors and no one would be disgraced. Reed blamed the patron for having concocted everything for them. The king, however, saw in his daughter her mother's insight. His Majesty considered this. He eventually agreed to follow the princess's plan and asked if Asna and Reed were on board with the idea. They agreed. Reed spoke first. He admitted that the battle had dragged on due to his stubbornness and explained that the Lord was innocent. However, the nobles weren't entirely satisfied with this. Elias understood that his son's performance hadn't convinced anyone, so he announced a second battle between Reed and Farah's bodyguard Asta. Norris was pleased with this choice. He was certain the Lord would be disgraced this time. The king ordered the combatants to prepare. Asna chose a wooden sword for herself. She understood that this was her chance to witness Reed's strength firsthand. She hadn't looked forward to a duel this much in a long time. Norris entered the warehouse and greeted the bodyguard. He wanted to introduce himself, but the woman interrupted him, saying she knew him. Asna asked what he was doing there. The old elf said he had a proposition for the girl. He wanted her to help him. Asna understood that Norris had come to lure her to his side. She asked him what he wanted. The man said the bodyguard should beat Reed and force him to abandon the marriage. Asna wanted to ignore him. but Norris said he was friends with her brothers. The man could arrange a reconciliation and free the girl from service in the trial. This way she could finally return to the Longmark family. The bodyguard sternly told the old elf not to delude himself. She didn't regret her choice and had no intention of taking his deal. This didn't please Norris. Asna left. The man asked her if she was willing to give up her life or not return. The girl pressed her sword to Norris's throat and declared that she was proud to serve the princess. She warned that any further words would be considered an insult to Farah. Norris left the warehouse disgruntled. On the battlefield, Asna smiled and said she'd be glad to see them duel. Reed felt the same way. The woman praises the young man for his excellent fight and notes that his mastery of body enhancement at his age is impressive. The young man understands that his secret move during the fight with Rashis was noticed and expresses hope that it won't be considered a violation of the rules. The interlocutor reassures him, explaining that only a few people notice this, and besides, it doesn't violate the rules. His Highness Riesis simply wasn't experienced enough. The young man accepts this answer with relief. The uniformed warrior declares that since the princess has ordered a serious fight, she is ready to do so. She assumes a fighting stance, holding a sword in each hand. The young man is surprised to see his opponent wield 2 swords. She apologizes in advance in case she accidentally injures him during the battle. The commander announces the start of the first battle. The warrior rushes into the attack, and the young man barely has time to react, noting her incredible speed. The warrior moves with lightning speed, appearing behind the young man. He cries out in surprise, realizing that his opponent has entered his blind spot in the blink of an eye. The girl unleashes a series of swift, powerful swings with her blades. The boy barely manages to jump aside, dodging the cross slashes that leave clear traces of the sword's trajectories in the air. The young man watches his opponent's movements closely and, spotting the opportune moment, decides this is his chance. He sees her back and prepares to counter. He leaps toward the warrior, shouting that she's caught. Swinging his weapon in the air, he attempts to strike from above while his opponent's back is turned. The warrior merely smirks slightly, maintaining her composure. She was in complete control of the situation. Despite her opponent's aggressive attack, she performs a sharp backflip, dodging the young man's blow. While he misses and lands on the ground, the warrior gracefully flips in midair, preparing for a counterattack. He looks at her in surprise. The girl addresses Reed with a request, calling him Lord. The young man listens attentively as they stand together in the open space. The uniformed warrior slowly approaches the young man, letting out a quiet laugh. She adjusts her headdress, maintaining her fighting spirit and readiness to continue the fight. The opponent bursts into loud laughter and enthusiastically praises the young man for being able to react even to such a complex move. The young man listens attentively to her praise, not lowering his weapon. The warrior asks for complete forgiveness for her behavior during the battle. She enthusiastically exclaims that she wants to see absolutely everything, the full true power of Lord Reed. The warrior with the pointed ears stares at the scene in bewilderment, trying to figure out what it is. Behind him and the others present, only the silhouettes of the onlookers are visible. A blonde-haired youth rushes forward with a loud cry. He swings his weapon, delivering a powerful blow, while sharp lines appear in the background, emphasizing the speed of his movement. The opponent's blades clash with a loud clang, creating powerful gusts of wind around them. The young man and the warrior stand facing each other, weapons locked in a tense standoff. The young man suggests that his opponent restrain herself a little during the fight. She replies that she cannot do so, as it would violate the princess's orders. The warrior suddenly kicks the young man from below upwards. He cries out in surprise, unable to react in time to the movement. She performs a spectacular backflip, simultaneously knocking the weapon out of her opponent's hands. The young man remains unarmed, watching the warrior's acrobatic maneuver. Landing, the girl catches her cap and puts it back on. She grins with satisfaction as she looks at the young man, noting that the fight is over. The young man admits that Asna is indeed as strong as he expected. She, in turn, praises his agility, mentioning his leap and backflip, adding that Lord Reed could easily have dodged it. The young man lowers his head and says seriously that it is precisely because of her strength that he too must act decisively. He stares at his opponent, his gaze filled with determination. The young man declares that now he will show everything he's capable of. The young man activates the magic power measurement skill. The result shows that his own level is 5480, while Asna's magic power is 2200. The hero reflects on the fact that his magical abilities are higher than he thought. At this moment, both participants in the duel are using body enhancement techniques. To win this battle, the hero can only wait for Asna to run out of magical energy. He realizes that if that happens, he'll have to withstand her sword attacks for a long time. He notices that his opponent is clearly enjoying this battle and wonders if she has any other tricks up her sleeve. The hero plans to do the same thing he did earlier with Rhasis. He grips his weapon tightly, preparing for the next confrontation. The hero slowly walks forward, holding his sword vertically with both hands in a fighting stance. He says the word karma and adds that here it is. Both opponents simultaneously rush towards each other with their blades raised to strike. Both duelists rush past each other, simultaneously slashing with their swords. The nearby onlookers watch the action in silence, and one of them suddenly freezes in shock, his eyes wide open. The little girl screams loudly, calling out to them both to hold on, calling them by name. She puts all her strength into this plea, hoping they will pull through. One of the observers reacts to the sudden turn of events with an expression of extreme surprise, his attention completely riveted on the outcome of the collision. An observer passionately calls on Lady Asna to win, asking her to show Renard and Magnolia's pride. Another spectator reacts with surprise, while the first continues to shout words of encouragement. The crowd reacts enthusiastically to the duel, shouting calls for them to keep up the pressure and not give up. They celebrate the superb fencing and encourage both participants, urging them to keep up the good work. Two witnesses watch the final battle with different expressions. One watches with anticipation, while the other, narrowing his eyes, makes a disgruntled sound through his teeth. A spectator shouts loudly, calling Lady Asna the greatest swordsman and urging her to finish off her opponent. He clenches his fist in excitement as he shouts words of encouragement. The liner and the maid ask the man sitting in front of them if they can also support Lord Reed. The man, without turning around, agrees. Having received permission, Liner and the maid joyfully prepare to start cheering for their master. They stand side by side, inspired by the opportunity to express their support. Liner and the maid loudly cheer for their master. The maid urges Lord Reed to demonstrate the strength of House Baldia, while Liner shouts that now is the time to show off the fruits of his training and asks him to remember everything they taught him. The man sitting in the chair curtly commands victory. He declares that his son cannot lose, all the while maintaining a cold and serious expression. The young man stands, clenching his fists, thinking that this fight is completely different from the previous one. He calls himself pathetic and insignificant, looking at what's happening. Suddenly, someone places a hand on his head, causing him to utter the word "mother" in surprise. The woman stands next to him, remaining calm. The young man screams at Lady Asna to win for them all. He leans over the railing, pouring all his emotion into this plea. Asna notices with a chuckle that the surroundings have become somewhat noisy. She remains calm, listening to the crowd's shouts. The hero is angry at this point, shouting curses through his teeth. He appears tense and focused on the current moment of the fight. The hero reflects on how Asna, with her two swords, is a true monster, possessing genuine unpredictability. He notes that her wooden blades move independently of each other, attacking from both sides at once, and that she also uses combat techniques and kicks. Analyzing the situation, he admits he sees no opportunity to attack and wonders how he can possibly keep up with her. Asna admires the hero for not flinching before her blades, noting his truly steely nerves and incredible battle-hardened swordsmanship. She apologizes and adds that Prince Rhasis is clearly no match for him. The hero turns his back on her and thanks her for the praise. The hero declares that he has met people far stronger than her. Asna listens to him while others present are visible in the background. The hero continues, insisting that it was those strong men who taught him to fight, and therefore he has no right to lose. He grips his sword tighter, demonstrating his resolve. Asta laughs in response and says that if that's the case, then so be it. Asna declares that it's time for her to start fighting seriously too. She quickly charges forward, closing the distance between her and her opponent. A fierce clash of blades ensues. The hero holds off Asna's powerful attack as their wooden swords clash close to their faces. Both participants are focused on fighting in this power struggle. The hero groans in pain, barely able to stand and leaning on his sword. He looks exhausted from the collision, sparks of magical energy still floating in the air. Asna asks Lord Reed what happened and clarifies whether this is really the end. She takes a confident step toward him as he tries to regain his balance. The hero curses under his breath, standing alone in the middle of the arena. He breathes heavily, realizing the critical nature of his position in this duel. The hero analyzes the situation, recalling that from the very beginning of the battle, one doubt has haunted him. He decides to resort to the magic dimension technique, peering intently at the scene before him. Magic power indicators the hero's is 1640, while Asna's is 1900. The hero states that he knew it. He realizes that Asna has been practicing magic longer than he has, and he understands that the expenditure of magical energy on strengthening the body is directly related to a warrior's skill. Recalling his training with his father and Rubens, he concludes that he cannot win even in a protracted battle of attrition, and decides he has only one course of action left. The hero rises to his full height and raises his wooden sword high above his head with both hands. He prepares to deliver the finishing blow, focusing all his attention on his opponent. The hero declares he'll bet everything on the next attack and asks Asna if she'll accept it. He stands at a distance, awaiting her answer, his eyes never leaving hers. Asna readily agrees and challenges Lord Reed to demonstrate his attack. She assumes a fighting stance, preparing to meet his attack. 3 spectators watch the proceedings tensely from the sidelines. They are frozen in anticipation of the duel's climax, aware of the importance of the moment. The hero lunges forward, raising his sword for a powerful overhand strike with both hands. He shouts out that he's going to attack. The blades clash violently, making a loud screech. The hero and Asna come face to face, their swords locked in a clash of strength. The hero's wooden sword shatters under the powerful blow. The weapon's fragments fly in all directions as Anja's blade snaps it in half. The hero staggers back, empty-handed and wide-eyed in shock. He has no time to react to the fact that he's been left without a weapon right in the middle of the fight. Asna smiles triumphantly and declares to Lord Reed that it seems all is over. The opponents stare into each other's eyes as the final confrontation unfolds. The hero shouts that it's not over yet and lunges forward. He slams into Asna, grabbing her clothes and body, ignoring the absence of her sword. Asna looks extremely surprised by this unexpected maneuver. Asna clenches her teeth, her gaze becoming intensely focused and furious. She breathes heavily from the strain, realizing the duel has entered the close quarters phase. The girl watches silently, her hands folded in front of her. She appears extremely focused on the finale of the duel. The hero lies on the ground, arms outstretched, laughing loudly. He is completely exhausted but seems satisfied with the outcome of the battle. Asna, breathing heavily and leaning on her knees, tells Lord Reed that this is definitely the end. She's barely able to stand from exhaustion. The hero, still lying there and smiling, accepts that this is truly the end. He looks completely exhausted and admits defeat. The judge officially declares Asna Lonmark the winner of the exhibition bout. He pronounces this loudly, summing up the battle. The crowd in the arena erupts in thunderous applause and joyful shouts. Spectators wave their hands and applaud, celebrating the victory of Asna, whose name is written in large letters in the foreground. The liner is confused while the maid and the man standing nearby make no secret of their joy and satisfaction. The man looks especially pleased. Rises gazes at Asna with admiration, mesmerized by her skill. Raisis' mother watches calmly from behind her son. Asna offers her hand to Rhesus, helping him to his feet. Rhesus, sitting on the ground, reaches for her hand, accepting the offer as a sign of the end of the duel and mutual respect. Asna, placing her hand on her chest, sincerely thanks Lord Reed for the duel. She admits to being impressed by his skills and even feels a little awkward, as she hasn't had such a clean and fair fight in a long time. Reed and Asna stand next to each other and chat amiably after the battle. Reed looks inspired and no longer upset by the defeat, responding to the girl's praise. A black-haired girl in a long dress hurries toward them, calling out their names. Asna! Lord Reed! She looks excited and joyful, heading straight for the participants of the just-concluded battle. The girl enthusiastically addresses the hero, saying his fight was incredibly powerful and engaging. She admits he lost, but the way he held his own against Asna was simply incredibly cool. The hero, listening to her praise, smiles shyly but sincerely. He is clearly touched by such support and recognition of his efforts. A school or academy building against a sky with scattered clouds. The atmosphere around calms down after the tense battle, bringing this scene to a close. Reed's father takes the floor and declares that this exhibition match was a most impressive spectacle for everyone present. He praises the brilliant swordsmanship of both participants and challenges the crowd. If anyone still doubts Lord Reed's strength or is dissatisfied with the result, they should come forward now. The spectators in the stands are frozen in complete silence. No one dares to accept the challenge or raise an objection after such a convincing display of skill. The referee, his expression stern, glances sideways. He appears satisfied that Reed's authority has been vindicated in a fair fight. A separate frame shows a man with long black hair and pointed ears. He watches the scene with a cold, impenetrable calm, as if assessing the consequences of this duel. Reed's father addresses the man with long hair, calling him Norris. He asks if he has any objections and whether he acknowledges Lord Reed's power. Norris, maintaining a gloomy and dissatisfied expression on his face, answers briefly, yes. Addressing Reed's father as Your Majesty Elias, Norris acknowledges that Lord Reed possesses impressive talents. Meanwhile, Reed himself, still recovering in the arena, wryly reflects that, judging by Norris's expression, he doesn't truly believe so. Norris declares that he believes they should also see Lord Reed's magical abilities. He approaches King Elias, proposing to continue the test. Reed sighs, thinking to himself that this was to be expected. He knows Norris won't leave him alone so easily. King Elias asks his son's opinion, asking Lord Reed what he would say to this proposal. Asna and Reed are still recovering from the fight, sitting on the arena sand. Reed replies that he's not opposed to demonstrating his magic, but politely asks for a short break. He admits he's still a little tired after the intense duel with Asna. King Elias agrees, saying that since Lord Reed asks, it will be so. He announces that after a short break, Reed will perform his magic. His final decision is heard over a wide shot of the arena. Norris and the other spectators begin to disperse. Only their silhouettes against the trees can be seen as they leave their seats to await the continuation of the test. A long-haired girl stands out among the crowd of people leaving, turning around for a moment. She looks thoughtful, as if something is bothering her or intriguing her about the upcoming magic demonstration. Norris slams his hand against the wall in anger, shouting curses. He's furious that everything is going against his plans, and he reproaches himself for using races as expendable. He realizes that this exhibition match was a fatal mistake, as all the dirt and rumors he so diligently spread are now completely washed away and nullified by this performance. The dark silhouette continues the dialogue, indicating that the opponent seems to have misunderstood something. The man in the cloak turns sharply towards the shadow. He asks again what exactly was said. Dark matter envelops the long-haired man, who grits his teeth in response to what is happening. It is claimed that cooperation was only due to his power and ability to lead the dissatisfied. It is acknowledged that advice was indeed given, but all blame for the current failures is placed solely on him, and a warning is issued not to underestimate the speaker. The man, his face obscured by strands of hair, utters fragments of words in confusion. There is an admission that he was simply used. A dark hand grabs the man's head, who bends over and covers his face with his hands as the shadow speaks of the possible end of the game for him. A dark silhouette punches through the door, leaving an exclamation mark on it. Shadow grins and states that it was stupid to think about the possibility of dealing with them, after which he gives advice to at least try to stay afloat. A dark hand roughly grabs the man's face as he mentally curses the strange behavior of the shadows. The question is asked whether help is needed, since the interlocutor's situation seems desperate. The man, kneeling and resting his hands on the floor, turns sharply at the new voice and clenches his teeth in a grin. Above the image of a dark-haired figure with pointy ears and a light dress is a phrase stating that everything is not finished yet. A girl in a maid's uniform and a young man in a uniform wipe away tears, while the maid tells Lord Reed that it was a magnificent fight. The blond man remarks that such stubborn resistance to the very end is impressive and exactly what he expected from his son, to which the child in the center expresses great gratitude while the man on the left remains silent. A hand in a dark glove falls on the child's head, who screams in surprise. A fair-haired man strokes a child's head while a young man and a maid smile contentedly nearby. During the internal dialogue, the thought is voiced that the power has already been fully demonstrated. The instruction is simply to fire the final shot and be done with it, without going overboard with magic. The child pops Varys's lollipop into his mouth to restore his magical powers, recalling Sandra's words about hammering down a nail that sticks out. Drawing unnecessary attention to oneself isn't a good idea, and someone quietly addresses Lord Reed from the sidelines. A girl with pointy ears and a fluffy dress offers to try the drink she's brought on a tray. She stumbles at the beginning of her sentence, but politely asks if the guest would like a helping. A clarifying question is asked about what it is. The girl explains that it's a fairly common drink in Renarat and hopes her interlocutor will enjoy it. The child in uniform carefully examines the glass in his hands. The boy brings the cup closer and notes to himself the specific aroma emanating from the drink. The surprised boy asks if it is green tea, to which the girl excitedly exclaims if he knows about it. The boy takes a sip from his cup with pleasure and lets out a contented sigh. The maid and the young man watching this scene talk about how calming and cute it looks. A mustachioed man in a light uniform addresses an interlocutor named Lord Reed. He continues his speech, stating that he thinks it is time to begin, and asks if the boy is ready. The boy, still holding the cup in his hand, confidently confirms his readiness. A long-haired man in a cloak walks forward, mentally addressing Norris. He recounts the events in the main palace, Prince Rhasis, the battle with Asna, and the use of magic, noting that his interlocutor truly doesn't know how to stop. Despite the emerging respect, he declares that he still hasn't forgiven Rhasis for being forced to speak ill of his mother. The boy looks toward the target, wondering if he just needs to hit it. People are watching him in the distance, and a practice pole stands there. The faces of a long-haired man and a boy are shown close-up opposite each other. A request is made to release at least one fireball on cue, as permission has been received from His Highness Elias to observe Lord Reed's magic up close, to which a brief response is given that the task is understood. The man smiles slightly, looking away. He addresses the boy, calling him just a little child and admitting that realizing his defeat by someone like that is humiliating, since it is unclear where such strength came from. The boy clarifies what exactly his interlocutor means while they are standing in the open space. The long-haired man states bluntly that the princess is a trump card for Renarat's advance and is completely unsuitable for someone like his interlocutor. He suggests abandoning the marriage, but immediately adds that a child would hardly understand that. The boy closes his eyes and replies that he really doesn't understand such logic and therefore cannot refuse. The man continues to insist that their princess should become empress, while the boy watches him silently. The boy asks if the plan is really to make Princess Farah empress and, using the Dark Elves' longevity, rule the empire from within. A man standing nearby grins and remarks that he likes smart children. The conclusion that rings in my mind is that Norris is simply embittered by his country's transformation into a vassal. Now he wants to get even, using Princess Farah for the purpose. A man with long hair smirks as he calls someone a ball of selfishness. It is a harsh statement that Princess Farah is not anyone's tool. The boy angrily declares that the future is created not by such old men, but by children. He adds that anyone who treats people as expendable has no right to speculate about Renarat's future, while his opponent stands silently at a distance. The long-haired man claims that this is precisely how childish his nature comes out. He adds that if he refuses, he'll find other ways, and asks if his interlocutor understands that behind him lies the dark side of this country. The boy asks directly if they are going to kill him. The man admits that this is also an option, but notes that things will not be easy with him and Lord Liner, so he takes a step forward. A long-haired man leans over to the boy and asks how his family is. The boy freezes in fear. The man explains that the boy treasures his younger sister and ailing mother, and also has warm relationships with the servants at the estate. He warns that one word from him could destroy this peace. The boy only replies, surprised. A shocking realization rings in my thoughts that the target is not the interlocutor himself or my father, but Mel and my mother. Shadow confirms the guess, noting that everything has finally become clear. A formal offer is made to Lord Reed to release magic on the target, to which the boy, head bowed, gives a curt confirmation. The other man narrows his eyes in satisfaction. The boy looks at his palms and says that he understands everything. He clenches his fists and mentally declares Norris his enemy. There is a reasoning that if all the anger was directed only at him alone, he would still be able to accept it. The boy clenches his fist in anger, thinking about how his opponent has decided to target those he holds dear for his own vile desires. In the background, the boy's silhouette is visible, standing before the man. The blond man turns around with a stern expression as the demand to repeat what was said sounds out. The long-haired man, perplexed, asks again what exactly the boy said about his family. The boy glares with fury in his eyes, while his opponent, in shock, wonders what kind of frightening murderous lust is emanating from the child. The boy, enraged, thrusts his hand forward and shouts loudly, demanding that he repeat what he said. His face is distorted with anger, and a powerful energy concentrates around him. The next moment, a powerful burst of magical power erupts in the form of a dark vortex. The long-haired man jumps back in shock, not expecting such a devastating attack from the child. The man watches in horror, stunned by the monstrous magical force he senses. The question of what this even is runs through his mind. The girl in glasses looks extremely puzzled and agitated. She admits she's never heard of such an idea before and is baffled as to how such compression is even technically possible. She asks her interlocutor point-blank what he's up to this time. The boy excitedly explains to Sandra that he wants to conduct an experiment under her supervision. He plans to use magic that no one has ever attempted before, believing that this way he can significantly increase its power. Sandra and the boy are standing in a spacious room with tall bookshelves. The girl agrees but sets a strict condition. If it becomes dangerous, they will immediately end the experiment. The boy, smiling, confirms the agreement. The crystal at the top of the staff glows brightly, and a focused beam of magical energy erupts from it. The command to activate the flame sounds. Sandra is skeptical that it's no different from a regular spell and asks if that's really what her interlocutor calls compression. The boy explains with a smile that it was just a normal shot for comparison. Sandra looks intrigued and slightly tense. The boy, getting serious, announces that now is the time for a real experiment. The boy pronounces the spell's name, Fire Spear, while Sandra watches intently. He first clenches his fist, then suddenly opens it. His gaze becomes focused and serious. A powerful stream of energy begins to swirl around his hand. The boy mentally describes the essence of the experiment, to maintain the already activated magic while continuing to infuse it with mana. The energy vortex around his fist grows ever more intense. The repulsive force in the boy's palm continues to grow. He repeats silently, "More, not yet, more," clenching his fist and accumulating a colossal amount of energy that glows with a blinding light. At some point, the tension reaches its breaking point. The boy feels he can't continue while those around him freeze in anxious anticipation. Sandra screams in panic, demanding that Reed stop the experiment immediately. The boy, barely able to contain the colossal tension, grits his teeth and says he can't hold it back. He suddenly raises his hand, releasing the accumulated energy. Powerful currents of air swirl around him. A deafening explosion occurs. Dust and debris fly in all directions, filling the training hall. Sandra, standing in the middle of the room, declares it was too dangerous and bans the use of compression magic indefinitely. Meanwhile, Reed sits on the floor, breathing heavily after the surge of power. The boy asks in surprise if it really is that serious. Sandra explains that the power of this technique reaches the level of large-scale spells and is capable of completely revolutionizing the foundations of offensive magic. She extends a black-gloved hand, emphasizing the significance of the moment. She confirms her words with a short yes, adding that there's another reason for concern as the two of them stand in the empty, majestic hall. The hero says that people like him won't always be there to stop them. He directs the flow of energy toward the horizon. A man with long dark hair admits his guilt and says he overreacted. He apologizes. The blonde-haired boy replies that he will not forgive him. He shouts angrily that he will never forgive. A pointy-eared man in uniform shouts Reed's name and asks what kind of magic this is, urging him not to act rashly. A long-haired companion stands beside him. The dark-haired man in the cloak runs away quickly, letting out a short cry. A young man and a maid restrain a dark-haired man who demands to be released. The young man asks what he did to Reed, and the maid adds that Reed has never lost his temper like this. The man with long black hair screams back that he did nothing and that the monster started it all himself. A figure in the distance stands before a huge vortex of energy, accompanied by a loud hum. The mustachioed man furiously asks Norris what he told Reed and calls him a scoundrel. Norris replies that he doesn't know and merely told him to use magic. The man calls him a pathetic scoundrel and is outraged that he denies everything in such a situation. The fair-haired youth declares that if Norris doesn't tell, he will. The young man accuses his opponent of threatening to kill his family, his mother, Mel, and everyone from the Baldia household. He shouts that he is the only one he will never forgive. The fair-haired hero waves his hand, creating a powerful gust of wind that throws Norris and his companion back. A maid and two other young men watch in the distance. The young man shouts at the others to back off. The maid objects, saying that one must not give in to rage or take a person's life, no matter the reason, and calls it unacceptable. The girl hugs Reed from behind, preventing him from attacking, and shouts that this is not the way to judge Norris. The dark-haired hero with short hair confirms her words and adds that Reed doesn't need to get his hands dirty. Norris's face is shown nearby, listening attentively. Someone confirms this and claims that Mr. Reed won't have to do it himself. Only the standing man's legs are visible. The girl in the cap declares that she will put an end to it herself. Cross-shaped marks from blade strikes are visible. Norris's face is contorted with horror and sweat is pouring off him as he sees what is happening. The man in the cap asks if his opponent is ready and states that first the arms will come, then the legs, and finally the head. The fair-haired youth utters Asna's name, while the others stare in confusion at the man in the cap. Meanwhile, Norris mutters in confusion that this is strange, and that everything shouldn't be like this. He wonders why no one comes to his aid, since he did everything as that person told him to. Someone says the opponent won't need his hands anymore, while the latter, in a panic, asks to wait. Norris admits his guilt and promises to do everything Reed says, backing up his words. A man with pointy ears and a mustache approaches Norris, stating that he will have a long conversation with him. The black-cloaked companion addresses Reed, saying that he understands his feelings. But there is a law to punish criminals, and this is no longer just his personal business. The pointy-eared man and his assistant bow to Reed. The man expresses sincere regret and is outraged that the servant dared to threaten the family of the man who became his daughter's fiancé. The fair-haired young man stands at a loss, not knowing what to answer to these words. The girl approaches Reed and apologizes for their servant's behavior. She asks him to calm his anger. The fair-haired boy bows his head and begins to cry. He squeezes his eyes shut, and a tear rolls down his cheek. Reed thanks everyone and apologizes for causing a ruckus. He stands with his head down and one hand raised. The hero's hand reaches towards the sky as the magical energy begins to dissipate, leaving behind only dark streaks in the air. The enormous vortex of energy finally dissipates in the sky above the treetops, accompanied by a powerful roar. A ray of light shoots upward and disappears over the horizon, leaving a clear sky above the estate. A lone leaf slowly falls against the peaceful landscape. On a city street, passers-by turn to look at people walking by as a leaf slowly swirls in the air. A girl with long hair and a large bow freezes, looking away with an expression of utter amazement. Someone's foot steps across the cracked ground, making a distinctive sound. A long-haired man in a dark cloak addresses his interlocutor, noting that he has never heard of him possessing such powerful magic. The young man objects to his father, claiming that everything is not so. The hero looks down and begins to explain what exactly it was. The young man falls to his knees, and his friends rush to his aid while the remaining bystanders watch in silence. With his last strength, he utters that it was just a fireball. He loses consciousness. The action moves to a dark building that resembles a prison. In a dark cell, a man sits in a chair, his head in his hands, wondering who could have imagined he possessed such magic, and why that person never intervened. A loud noise echoes through the building outside. The man covers his face with his hand and says he can't admit it. Deep within the royal castle lies a prison rumored to have no escape and where only death awaits. Behind the bars of a cell sits a man, his face buried in his hands. He wonders why things turned out this way. The inscription states that this is a room between life and death, behind which an empty prison cell with bars is visible. The man declares that he cannot die here, adding that he still has unfinished business. A man with pointy ears and a uniform and his cloaked companion approach the cell, announcing the arrival of His Majesty Elias. The prisoner clutches his face in panic. Norris falls to his knees before the bars, addressing King Elias. He begs forgiveness for what happened, claiming he did it all solely for the good of the country. He continues to justify himself, claiming he was merely following someone else's orders. The man in uniform and his companion stand silently before him, listening to these arguments. A man with pointy ears in uniform looks down at Norris, who begs for at least his life to be spared. A hooded man kneels next to a prisoner prostrate on the floor, while a man in uniform watches from the side. He grabs Norris by the clothes and yells at him in a rage. Norris only babbles in response, unable to resist. The man in uniform forcefully throws Norris aside, declaring that he will be severely punished for his actions. Norris lies on the cell floor, covering his face with his hands and crying. He repeats that it's not his fault and wonders why things turned out this way. A man in a cloak stands in the doorway. Zack tells him not to be too cruel, to which the other man apologizes and replies that the man was in the way. One man wonders what this man is doing here, while the other ponders the meaning of what is happening. A voice from behind bars asks if they are going to explain themselves, to which they answer that since he has served this country for so long, they decided to clear everything up before his end. One of the men asks Zack to tell him everything, while the other remarks that His Majesty loves such things. The man explains that it all began after the Baltic incident, when an alliance with the Empire was concluded, and although formally it was an alliance treaty, in reality it meant becoming a vassal state, which was fiercely opposed by part of the aristocracy, including his interlocutor. The man states that for Renarat to survive as a state, they had to accept that treaty. But because of the opposition, the country's domestic politics became unstable. He continues that His Majesty then came up with a plan, which consisted of allowing the dissatisfied to form their own faction and give them some time to speak freely. At the appropriate moment, the plan was to eliminate them all at once. The man informs the kneeling Norris that he was the figure who was put in charge of this group. He asks if Norris ever noticed why ideas that no one else could carry through were much more easily accepted when he proposed them. Another man explains that this is precisely why His Majesty allegedly could not simply ignore his proposals. Norris cries out in despair that this is nonsense and that it simply cannot be, to which his interlocutor reminds him that someone already told him about this. He asks if he remembers the phrase about them using him. Norris realizes that that shadow was also initially on their side, and his interlocutor only confirms this with a gesture. One of those present thanks Capella for her service, while Norris is in shock at what is happening.